Welcome back to the Cheating Tales Lab. First of all, a huge thank you for helping us reach 5,000 subscribers. Thank you all for your amazing support. To celebrate, we're launching our second channel, Infidelity Tales Lab, where you'll get one-day early access to all our stories plus exclusive, original cheating wife stories you won't find anywhere else. You can subscribe now by clicking the link in the description or the pinned comment, or simply search for Infidelity Tales Lab on YouTube. Don't miss out. Subscribe and listen to exclusive stories. You won't regret subscribing. Now let's begin the story. Blake Kerr's steady hands, which had just performed a complex 16-hour heart surgery, gripped his car keys as he pulled into his driveway. The respected cardiothoracic surgeon had left Memorial Hospital early, his mind focused on completing the mounting paperwork from his latest procedures. The evening shadows stretched across his upscale home as he entered silently, his surgeon's instinct for quiet movement serving him well. As he approached his study, Patricia's voice drifted down from their bedroom, her tone carrying an unfamiliar note of calculation. "Mom, I've got it all planned out." Patricia's words sliced through the quiet house. Blake froze, his hand hovering over the study door handle. Something in her voice, a smug satisfaction, made him pause. "Once he's done paying for the kids' college, I'm filing for divorce," Patricia continued, each word driving an icy spike into Blake's chest. "Then I'll accuse him of domestic crime and live with Casey and the kids from his money." Blake's world tilted on its axis. Casey Dawson, the tennis coach, the man who had been spending an inordinate amount of time with his wife under the guise of improving her serve, the mysterious text messages that made Patricia smile secretively, her sudden dedication to fitness that had her spending hours at the tennis club. The pieces clicked together with the same precision Blake used in the operating room. Late-night tennis meetings, hushed phone calls, the way Patricia's eyes would light up at the mention of her training sessions. A lesser man might have burst into the room, confronting his wife in a rage. But Blake Kerr hadn't become one of the country's top cardiothoracic surgeons by acting on impulse. His mind, trained by years of high-stakes surgeries, was already analyzing, planning, preparing. Without making a sound, Blake retreated to his study. His movements were deliberate, controlled, the same way he handled a scalpel during a critical procedure. As he sat behind his desk, his expression remained neutral, but his eyes had taken on the focused intensity his surgical team knew well. Patricia's voice continued to float down the hallway, discussing the details of her betrayal with her mother, unaware that her carefully constructed plan had just begun to unravel. The following days saw Blake operating with the same precision he used in surgery, but this time, his careful cuts were designed to expose his wife's deception. Every movement was calculated, every reaction measured. During breakfast, Blake maintained his usual routine, scanning medical journals while sipping his coffee, seemingly oblivious to Patricia's poorly hidden smirks at her phone. His phone, however, was quietly recording every conversation, every subtle interaction. At the hospital, Blake threw himself into preparing for a groundbreaking heart surgery. The procedure, if successful, could revolutionize treatment options for dozens of patients. His colleagues noticed his increased focus, attributing it to the high stakes of the upcoming operation. Dr. Kerr, a young resident, approached him during rounds. "The board is particularly interested in the outcome of this procedure." Blake nodded, his mind simultaneously tracking multiple threads: the surgery preparation, the evidence gathering, the facade of normalcy. "Then we'll make sure to exceed their expectations." Meanwhile, Patricia grew bolder in her indiscretions. At the country club, she sat too close to Casey Dawson, their heads bent together over supposed training schedules. Blake observed from a distance as their mutual friends awkwardly averted their eyes, discomfort evident in their forced smiles. Jay Fuller, Blake's longtime friend and fellow doctor, approached him at the club bar. "Hey, Blake. Patricia mentioned she'd be late tonight. Something about an emergency tennis committee meeting." Blake noticed the slight tremor in Jay's voice, the way his eyes wouldn't quite meet Blake's. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Jay was complicit in covering Patricia's affair. "Thanks for letting me know," Blake replied smoothly, logging this betrayal away with the others. Later that day, Blake met with Lawrence Sullivan, the city's most formidable divorce attorney. The meeting took place in a private room at a downtown restaurant, far from prying eyes. "Document everything," Sullivan advised, his expression grim. Every meeting, every call, every suspicious transaction. Blake pulled out a tablet, displaying the evidence he'd already gathered. "I'm ahead of you there." Sullivan's eyebrows rose as he swiped through the files. "Most clients come to me with suspicions. You're bringing me a case." The discovery of Patricia's secret bank account came through meticulous investigation. Blake traced the money transfers with the same attention to detail he used in examining medical charts. Each transaction told a story of premeditated betrayal. Then came the email from Brooke Dawson. Casey's ex-wife had heard rumors about his latest student and felt compelled to reach out. "Dr. Kerr," her message began, "you should know that Casey has a pattern. He specifically targets wealthy married women. Your wife isn't his first, and she won't be his last." Brooke's information provided a critical piece of the puzzle. Casey Dawson wasn't just an opportunistic tennis coach. He was a calculated predator with a history of similar affairs. At the hospital, Blake channeled his personal turmoil into professional excellence. The revolutionary surgery he'd been preparing for became his anchor, a reminder of who he was beyond his failing marriage. The operation itself was a masterpiece of surgical precision. For 8 hours, Blake worked with unwavering focus, his hands steady as he pioneered a new technique that would change lives. "Remarkable work, Dr. Kerr." Dr. Troy Clements, the chief of surgery, congratulated him afterward. "This will put Memorial Hospital on the map." The celebration dinner that followed was an exercise in restraint. Patricia played her role perfectly, hanging on Blake's arm and beaming with pride. But her phone kept lighting up under the table, Casey's messages providing a constant counterpoint to her performance. Later that night, as Blake worked in his study, Patricia's voice once again carried through the house. She was on another call with her mother, unaware that every word was being recorded. "The allegations need to be believable," her mother counseled. "We'll start small, emotional manipulation first, then escalate." "What about the twins?" Patricia asked, referring to Taylor and Sandy. "They need to side with me for this to work." "They're in college now," her mother replied. "Promise them whatever they want. Once we get Blake's money, we can control the narrative." Blake sat in his darkened study, listening to his wife and mother-in-law plot his destruction. His expression remained impassive, but his eyes held the same intensity they did during complex surgeries. Every word they spoke was another piece of evidence, another tool he would use to excise this cancer from his life. As he sat there, Blake Kerr wasn't just a surgeon planning a precision strike. He was a man preparing to cut out the malignancy that threatened to destroy everything he'd built. And like every surgery he'd performed, failure wasn't an option. Blake Kerr sat in his office at Memorial Hospital, his fingers dancing across the keyboard with surgical precision. The screen displayed his banking interface as he methodically transferred assets to secure accounts he'd established days earlier. Each transaction was documented, photographed, and logged with the same attention to detail he brought to his medical charts. A notification popped up, another successful transfer. The joint accounts were being drained, though Blake carefully left enough to avoid any legal complications. His mouse hovered over the college tuition payment portal before clicking cancel on the upcoming installments. His phone buzzed, a text from Taylor and Sandy confirming their lunch meeting. Blake had chosen an upscale restaurant across town, far from their usual haunts where Patricia's social circle might spot them. The twins arrived together, their father's punctuality evident in their timing. Taylor, with her father's analytical mind, and Sandy, possessing his quiet strength, settled into their seats. Concern creased their brows at their father's unusual secrecy. "Dad, what's going on?" Taylor asked, her pre-med training making her particularly attuned to subtle changes. "You've never asked us to meet like this before." Blake pulled out his tablet, his expression grave. "There's something you need to hear," he said, pressing play on the first recording. Patricia's voice filled their private dining room, discussing her plans to falsely accuse their father of domestic crime. The twins' faces transformed as they listened, shock, disgust, and anger playing across their features in waves. "That's not even all of it," Blake said quietly, playing the second recording. the conversation about manipulating the twins themselves. Sandy's hands clenched into fists. She was going to use us? Against you? Taylor's expression hardened, a mirror of her father's surgical focus. The tennis lessons, the late meetings, it was all with Casey? Blake nodded, letting his children process the betrayal at their own pace. He'd seen enough patients receive life-altering news to know when silence was the best medicine. What are you going to do? Taylor finally asked. I'm handling it, Blake replied, his voice steady. But I needed you to know the truth before things start happening. Your tuition payments have been suspended. Good, Sandy interrupted. We don't want her money. Or her manipulation, Taylor added, her voice cold. Blake studied his children, seeing in them the same strength he'd relied on throughout his career. This won't be easy. Your mother will try to turn this against me, against us. The twins exchanged glances before Taylor spoke for both of them. We're with you, Dad. All the way. Meanwhile, across town, Patricia stared at her banking app in growing panic. The accounts were nearly empty, the regular transfers she'd come to rely on had stopped, and her credit cards were declined. Her manicured fingers trembled as she called Casey. Something's wrong, she hissed into the phone. All the money, it's gone. Casey's voice oozed false confidence. Don't worry, babe. We'll figure something out. Blake probably just made a mistake with the accounts. But Patricia heard the undertone in his voice, the slight waver that suggested his interest lay more with the missing money than with her welfare. As she ended the call, Patricia noticed an email notification. Payment declined. University tuition? Her carefully constructed plan was starting to unravel, and for the first time, real fear crept into her heart. The confrontation erupted in Blake's home office that evening. Patricia burst through the door, her face flushed with anger and panic. What have you done? She demanded, waving her phone displaying the empty account balances. How dare you? How dare I? Blake's voice cut through her tirade, cool and precise as a scalpel. That's an interesting choice of words, Patricia. Don't play games with me, she snarled. I'll ruin you. One phone call to the police about domestic crime. Blake pressed a button on his computer, and Patricia's voice filled the room. Then I'll accuse him of domestic crime and live with Casey and the kids from his money. Patricia's face drained of color. Blake continued playing segments of recordings, her conversations with her mother, her plans to manipulate their children, everything. You've been recording me, she whispered, her bravado crumbling. Let's be precise, Blake said, his tone clinical. I've been gathering evidence. Something any reasonable person would do when they discover a conspiracy against them. Across town, Casey Dawson was already distancing himself from the imploding situation. He'd seen the writing on the wall the moment Patricia mentioned the frozen accounts. In the tennis club's private courts, he focused his attention on Mandy, a young student with a trust fund and naive eyes. Your form is really improving, he said smoothly, standing closer than necessary to adjust her stance. The same moves he'd used on Patricia, recycled for a new target. Patricia's frantic calls went straight to voicemail. Her text messages received increasingly shorter responses until they stopped altogether. The reality of her situation began to sink in as she watched her lover's attention shift to younger, wealthier prey. Jay Fuller, believing himself clever, attempted to warn Patricia about Blake's evidence collection. He cornered her after a country club luncheon. Patricia, you need to be careful. Blake knows everything, he whispered. He's been gathering proof. Dr. Fuller, a stern voice interrupted. Two men in suits approached, badges glinting. We're from the insurance fraud division. We need to discuss some irregularities in your billing practices. Jay's face went pale as he realized Blake had outmaneuvered him too. His years of insurance fraud, carefully hidden, had been exposed with surgical precision. Patricia and her mother launched their desperate counterattack, spreading whispers through the hospital corridors about Blake's supposed instability and aggression. But they miscalculated badly. Dr. Kerr's revolutionary surgery saved my daughter's life, one board member declared during an emergency meeting. These accusations are absurd. Dr. Troy Clements, standing at the head of the conference table, addressed the board. Dr. Kerr's work has put Memorial Hospital at the forefront of cardiac care. His reputation is impeccable. The rumors died quickly, suffocated by Blake's sterling reputation and recent surgical triumph. Patricia's attempts to poison his professional life only served to further isolate her. Taylor and Sandy packed their belongings from the family home efficiently, their movements precise and determined. They'd inherited their father's ability to compartmentalize emotion when necessary. "She actually thought we'd believe her over Dad," Sandy muttered, boxing up photos from happier times. Taylor nodded, her expression grim. "She never really knew us at all." Blake's new apartment was smaller but warmly furnished, a fresh start free from Patricia's influence. The twins settled in easily, their presence transforming the space into a real home. Casey made one last desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. He approached Blake in the hospital parking lot, a manila envelope in his hands. "I have evidence that could embarrass you," he said, trying to sound threatening. "Photos, email." Blake didn't let him finish. Without a word, he handed Casey his own envelope. Inside were detailed reports of Casey's previous scams, statements from other wealthy women he'd targeted, and financial records showing his pattern of fraud. "Would you like to compare evidence?" Blake asked quietly, his surgeon's eyes dissecting Casey's bravado. "Or would you prefer to walk away while you still can?" Casey's swagger deflated as he realized he'd brought a knife to a gunfight. Blake had outmaneuvered him at every turn, his precision and thoroughness leaving no room for counterplay. As Casey slunk away, his schemes in tatters, Patricia watched from her car across the street. Her carefully constructed world had crumbled to dust. Her lover had abandoned her, her children despised her, and her husband had proved to be far more formidable than she'd ever imagined. The man she dismissed as a workaholic surgeon, too absorbed in his career to notice her deception, had systematically dismantled her life with the same precision he used in the operating room. And like his surgeries, his operation had been a complete success. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Lawrence Sullivan rose to present Blake Kerr's case. The veteran divorce attorney moved with the confidence of a man holding a winning hand. "Your Honor," Sullivan began, "what we have here is not merely a case of infidelity, but a calculated conspiracy to defraud and defame my client." Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her discount store outfit a stark contrast to her former designer wardrobe. Her attorney, a public defender since no private lawyer would take her case, shuffled papers nervously. Sullivan methodically presented the evidence: recordings, financial records, photographs. Each piece clicked into place like a surgical instrument being laid out for an operation. "And now, Your Honor, we present evidence of premeditated plans to falsely accuse Dr. Kerr of domestic crime." Sullivan played the recordings that had first alerted Blake to his wife's betrayal. Patricia's face contorted with rage and fear as her own voice filled the courtroom. "Then I'll accuse him of domestic crime and live with Casey and the kids from his money." The judge's expression darkened with each new piece of evidence. When Patricia's mother took the stand to testify against Blake, Sullivan was ready. "Mrs. Henderson," Sullivan addressed Patricia's mother, "could you explain these emails?" He projected a series of messages onto the courtroom screen, showing years of the older woman facilitating her daughter's affairs. "That's private correspondence." Patricia's mother sputtered. "Indeed," Sullivan replied coldly. "Private correspondence showing a pattern of enabling adultery and fraud, not just with Mr. Dawson, but with 3 other men over the past decade." The courtroom stirred as this revelation landed. Patricia's mother deflated on the stand, her credibility evaporating. Next came the twins' testimony. Taylor took the stand first, her composure matching her father's surgical precision. "My mother saw us as assets," Taylor stated, her voice clear and firm. "She planned to use us as weapons against our father. But Dad never once spoke ill of her to us. He let the truth speak for itself." Sandy followed, his testimony equally damaging. "While Mom was plotting with her tennis coach, Dad was saving lives and supporting our dreams. The choice of who to believe wasn't hard." Throughout their testimony, Blake sat stoically, his expression neutral but his eyes reflecting pride in his children's strength. The judge's disgust became increasingly evident as the case unfolded. When news arrived that Casey Dawson had fled town, served with multiple lawsuits from previous victims emboldened by Blake's stand, it was the final nail in Patricia's coffin. These other women, Sullivan explained, all wealthy, all targeted by Mr. Dawson, all with similar stories. Mrs. Kerr wasn't his first victim, but thanks to Dr. Kerr's actions, she will be his last. Patricia slumped in her chair as her carefully constructed world collapsed completely. The lover who had promised to stand by her was gone, her mother had been discredited, and her own children had testified against her. The judge's ruling was decisive and devastating. 3 months after the divorce ruling, Patricia stood outside Blake's apartment building, her expensive makeup unable to hide the toll of recent events. She pressed the buzzer repeatedly, her desperation evident. Blake answered the door, his expression impassive. The contrast between them was stark. While Patricia showed the strain of her downfall, Blake looked stronger than ever. "Blake, please," Patricia began, tears streaming down her face. "I've lost everything. I made a terrible mistake. We could try again, start over." Without a word, Blake pressed play on his phone. Patricia's voice filled the hallway. "Once he's done paying for the kid's college, I'm filing for divorce. Then I'll accuse him of domestic crime." Patricia's pleas died in her throat as Blake quietly shut the door, the soft click more final than any slam could have been. Inside the apartment, Taylor and Sandy were setting up for a holiday dinner, their first of many new traditions. The twins had flourished in their college environments, their father's unwavering support allowing them to focus on their studies despite the family turmoil. "She tried again?" Taylor asked, though she already knew the answer. Blake nodded once, then turned to help with dinner preparations. There was no need to dwell on Patricia's desperate attempts at reconciliation. At Memorial Hospital, Blake's reputation had only grown stronger. His pioneering work in cardiac surgery attracted international attention, and his handling of personal adversity earned him deep respect from colleagues. Among these colleagues, Dr. Claudia Reynolds, a brilliant anesthesiologist, had worked alongside Blake during several groundbreaking procedures. Their professional rapport gradually evolved into something more, built on mutual respect and shared values. 1 year later, Blake's new home filled with warmth and laughter as Taylor and Sandy returned for summer break. The elegant but comfortable house reflected its owner, sophisticated without pretense, welcoming but dignified. "Did you hear about Mom?" Sandy asked, showing his father a social media post. Patricia's new life as a receptionist at a small clinic was a far cry from her previous social status. "And Casey's been arrested in Arizona," Taylor added. "Tried his scam on the wrong woman," a state prosecutor. Blake absorbed the news with quiet satisfaction, but his attention was drawn to the doorbell. Claudia arrived, bringing dessert for their family dinner. Her presence felt natural, unforced, the antithesis of Patricia's calculated performances. Taylor and Sandy exchanged knowing looks as they watched their father with Claudia. This was what a real relationship looked like, built on honesty, mutual respect, and genuine care. As they settled around the dinner table, Blake's phone rang. Dr. Troy Clement's name flashed on the screen. "Congratulations, Chief of Surgery," Clements announced without preamble. The board's decision was unanimous. Blake shared the news with his loved ones, their genuine celebration a stark contrast to the artificial praise of his previous life. Looking around the table, he saw his real family, children who chose truth over manipulation, a potential partner who valued integrity over appearances, and a future built on his own terms. The game-changing surgery that had coincided with Patricia's betrayal had become a footnote in his success story. By refusing to be a victim, by methodically excising the cancer of betrayal from his life, Blake had shown his children what real strength looked like. As laughter filled his new home, Blake Kerr knew that every calculated decision, every carefully planned step away from betrayal, had led him to something better than mere survival. He had turned crisis into opportunity, betrayal into triumph. The man who had saved countless lives in the operating room had also saved himself, and in doing so, had built a life more genuine and fulfilling than the one Patricia had tried to destroy. Epilogue. 5 years later. Time had a way of revealing the true consequences of betrayal. For Patricia Henderson, formerly Patricia Kerr, the fall from grace continued long after the divorce. The small clinic where she worked as a receptionist had closed, forcing her to take an even lower position at a veterinary office. Her once manicured hands, now rough from cleaning kennels, served as a daily reminder of her downfall. The modest studio apartment she called home was a far cry from the luxurious house she had shared with Blake. Her mother, disgraced by the revelation of her role in multiple affairs, had retreated to a small town in Florida, their relationship strained by mutual blame. The society circles that had once been Patricia's entire world now treated her as a cautionary tale. Her name was whispered at country club gatherings, not in gossip, but in warnings to young wives about the price of betrayal. Casey Dawson's fate had been even more severe. After his arrest in Arizona, investigations revealed a pattern of fraud spanning multiple states. He now resided in a federal prison, serving an 8-year sentence for wire fraud and extortion. His victims, emboldened by Blake's example, had come forward one by one, each testimony adding years to his sentence. His charming smile and tennis prowess meant little in the prison yard. Jay Fuller, following his conviction for insurance fraud, had lost his medical license. Last anyone heard, he was selling pharmaceutical supplies in a neighboring state, his professional reputation permanently tarnished. His wife had divorced him, taking their children and leaving him to face his disgrace alone. In stark contrast, Blake Kerr's life had flourished. Under his leadership as chief of surgery, Memorial Hospital had become a leading center for cardiac innovation. His pioneering techniques had saved countless lives, and medical students competed fiercely for residency positions under his mentorship. His marriage to Claudia 2 years after the divorce had brought a new dimension of joy to his life. Their partnership, built on mutual respect and shared values, showed Taylor and Sandy what genuine love looked like. Claudia's steady presence and brilliant mind complemented Blake's strength perfectly, their combined medical expertise making them a formidable team in the operating room and in life. Taylor had followed in her father's footsteps, excelling in medical school and showing promise in cardiothoracic surgery. Her analytical mind and steady hands suggested she would carry on the Kerr legacy of medical excellence. Sandy had chosen a different path, becoming a successful criminal defense attorney, his father's experience having shown him the importance of justice and truth. The twins maintained no contact with their mother. They had received multiple letters from Patricia over the years, each more desperate than the last, but these remained unopened in a drawer. They had chosen to focus on the authentic relationships in their lives rather than the manipulation of their past. Blake and Claudia's home had become the center of family gatherings, filled with the warmth of genuine affection. Holiday dinners, once tense affairs under Patricia's superficial perfectionism, were now celebrations of real connection. The addition of Claudia's young daughter from her previous marriage had brought new light to Blake's role as a father, showing him that family bonds transcended biological ties. Dr. Troy Clements, now semi-retired, often remarked that the hospital's remarkable transformation under Blake's leadership had its roots in that pivotal moment of personal crisis. Some men are broken by betrayal, he would say. Others use it as forge to remake themselves stronger. Brooke Dawson, Casey's ex-wife who had first warned Blake, had found her own peace. Her decision to reach out had not only helped Blake, but had given other victims the courage to come forward. She occasionally consulted with advocacy groups helping women identify and avoid predatory relationships. The country club that had once been the stage for Patricia's indiscretions had changed as well. The old guard of enablers and secret keepers had largely been replaced by a younger crowd who valued authenticity over appearances. Blake maintained his membership, though he rarely visited. His focus was on substance rather than social status. One day, as Blake left the hospital after a successful surgery, he passed a woman in shabby medical scrubs leaving a hiring agency. It took him a moment to recognize Patricia, her appearance so far removed from the polished socialite she had once been. Their eyes met briefly, hers filled with desperate recognition, his with complete indifference. He continued to his car without breaking stride, his mind already on the family dinner awaiting him at home. That evening, surrounded by the love of his true family, Claudia, the twins, their partners, and his stepdaughter, Blake realized that Patricia's betrayal had ultimately been a gift. It had stripped away the artificial facade of his previous life, allowing him to build something real and lasting in its place. The man who had once discovered his wife's betrayal through an overheard phone call was gone. In his place stood someone stronger, wiser, and more complete. A man who had turned trauma into triumph, betrayal into blessing, and loss into legacy. Blake Kerr had not just survived. He had redefined what it meant to win.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
I was devastated when I found out my wife had been in bed with another man twice and was about to do it again. I've read about the overwhelming emotions that hit a person when they realize their once solid and reliable marriage is now just a story. When the emotional storm settled, my marriage was unrecognizable. Everything was gone. Trust, respect, admiration, concern, and love had all disappeared. All that remained was devastation, pushing me to give up and walk away. I wanted to end my marriage. There was nothing worth saving. My wife had turned our life into a pile of garbage. Susie and I had a bad fight about remodeling our living room. She thought the furniture was old and wanted to redecorate, but I explained it was only 2 years old, expensive, and not worth replacing. She insisted on something new, and I may have made a mistake by suggesting she was tired of me. She sarcastically said she might go to bed with someone else, and in anger, I shouted that she should decide what she wants, but not expect me to wait for her. When she mentioned she should have married Bill instead of me, I got furious, yelled that I never wanted to hear her name again, and refused to buy new furniture. The argument ended, and I left for the club to cool down. Bill had always been my main rival, the golden boy in our community. He once had his eye on my wife, but she chose me. Though they met during a short separation, he almost succeeded in winning her over. Despite my hard work and success, Bill's seemingly effortless prosperity made me jealous. I had no interest in pursuing a career in business. My upbringing emphasized the values of hard work, honesty, and reliability. I was taught never to harbor jealousy towards others' success. Despite these principles, a certain sensitivity lingered within me, particularly concerning Susie. The memory of their first meeting and the way he touched her remains etched in my mind. Around 9 in the evening, my home phone rang on my mobile. Deciding to let it go to voicemail, I avoided speaking to my wife. Stress and a few beers fueled my decision. I feared uttering unpleasant words that I might later regret. Upon listening to the voicemail, the message conveyed an apology for an earlier exchange. The caller urged me to contact Susie since I wouldn't be returning home soon. The message hinted at going out alone, concluding with a cryptic remark, "It wasn't enough." As I began to recover from our earlier dispute, anger resurfaced. Pouring another beer, I consumed it hastily before setting out to find her. Checking all the town's bar parking lots proved futile. Her car was nowhere in sight. Suspecting she might be with someone familiar, I headed to Patty's best friend's house. To my dismay, Susie's car was parked there. Dave, Patty's husband, greeted me at the door, mentioning the night out and their decision to go bar hopping. When I inquired about Patty's car, he confirmed their presence at a bachelor party. Determined to locate them, I visited the bachelor's place, discovering Patty's car in the parking lot. Contemplating a direct confrontation with Susie, I opted to sober up in the car before taking any action. Around 11, they emerged from the bachelor's place and departed in Patty's car. Following at a discreet distance, they made their way to a downhill bar, as Dave had suggested. Observing from the parking lot, I anticipated their move to the next location. At precisely 11:30, they arrived at what seemed to be their final stop, a pub and a hotel. Concerned about Susie's intentions, I realized I needed to find out more. Attempting a makeshift disguise with a baseball cap and a plain t-shirt from the trunk, I sneaked into the pub. Despite not being completely sober and my failed attempt at anonymity, thanks to my name on the t-shirt, I figured it was better than no disguise at all. Inside, I spotted Susie with Bill, seated at the back of the bar, engrossed in conversation. Seeking a discreet vantage point, I noticed an empty bus behind Susie. Silently moving there, I overheard their entire conversation, except for a few whispered moments. Susie thanked Bill for coming, and he reciprocated the sentiment. Bill reminisced about their time together 7 years ago, and twice since my marriage to Susie. Their reunion tonight seemed driven by a desire for revenge after our earlier fight. As I listened, the painful truth unfolded. Susie had betrayed me twice before, and planned to do so again tonight. Despite her professed love, her actions revealed a selfish and indifferent nature. Her motive wasn't love. It was revenge, shattering my perception of our relationship. The conversation left me devastated, and I realized I no longer loved her. It was a profound loss, and I nearly succumbed to tears, accepting that it was over. I waited, contemplating how much time would elapse before they proceeded to the room. The words exchanged between them hinted at Susie's readiness, and I could almost envision the smile on her face. Aware of her presence based on their conversation, my anger simmered beneath the surface as they stood up and made their way to the elevators. Suppressing the urge to lash out physically, I trailed them to the lobby. Uncertain of their exact floor, I approached the receptionist and requested a call to Pill's room. He angrily answered, correcting my misconception that it was room 422, not 312. Threatening police involvement, he forcefully hung up the phone. Taking the elevator to the 4th floor, I approached room 422. Eavesdropping until their actions became apparent, I knocked assertively, savoring the anticipation of disrupting their illicit rendezvous. Stepping back from the peephole, I forcefully slammed the door, causing the safety chain to break. The shocking scene revealed my with nothing on wife on the bed, her face turning pale as she screamed. Pill protested, exclaiming, "Oh my God, no!" as he recovered. He demanded my departure, threatening to summon security. Despite Susie's pleas, I sternly informed her not to return home. Surprisingly calm, I sat in the car for a while to calm down further. I waited to see if the police would show up or if Susie would leave with Pill. About 15 minutes later, Bill left the hotel and Susie got into her car. They didn't stay in the hotel room after I left, but the damage had been done. Adding insult to injury, or as they say, pouring gasoline on the fire, gave me an idea. I went home and went to bed. I'm not sure when the phone rang, but it was Patty calling. She explained that Susie is staying with Dave and her, so I shouldn't worry. I told Patty that I won't worry about Susie anymore. I don't care. Patty woke me up unnecessarily. I asked about the time, and she said it's 3 a.m., claiming I can't say I don't care, knowing I love Susie and she loves me. Patty shared that Susie is at their place, crying about her mistakes tonight, wanting forgiveness, and asking to come back home. I informed Patty that Susie can't return home and asked about her previous involvement with Pill. Patty expressed relief for not having a serious hangover and being up since 8 a.m. By 10 a.m., I was ready to face Susie. I called Patty and told her Susie could come back home if she wanted. I stood at the entrance when Susie arrived, accompanied by Dave and Patty, probably to ensure no physical damage. Seeing a pile in the front yard, Susie asked what it was. I explained it's everything reminding us of each other, including gifts, photos, and old furniture. I set our wedding photo on fire as a symbolic act, signaling the end of our marriage. Flames quickly engulfed everything, leaving only ashes and charred furniture frames. I told Susie she won and hoped it was worth it. Our marriage is over, and she can take everything. I don't want anything and hope not to remind her of me. She'll get details from my lawyer. Shortly after, sirens approached, police arrived, and firefighters extinguished the remaining embers. I apologized for the trouble, clarifying I burned the remnants of the marriage. I was taken into custody. As they led me away, I saw Susie crying. I spent a couple of days in jail, and a psychiatrist was called to assess my mental state. They discovered that I was distressed and devastated, but still mentally sound, surprisingly. They might have released me earlier, but they wanted to observe me for a few days just to be certain. I paid the bail and retrieved my car from the office parking lot, where I had stored the things I wanted to keep, mainly clothes and personal items. Then my trial began, and I admitted guilt to all charges, receiving a $5,000 fine plus court costs. It was a small cost to end my shattered marriage. Susie contested the divorce, persistently leaving voicemails on my mobile, pleading for forgiveness and reconciliation. Despite the $5,000 cost, I never heard from her after leaving a message on her home phone, expressing that while she claimed it meant nothing to her, it meant everything to me. The divorce was finalized, and I gave her everything she desired just to put it behind me. Pill's wife discovered the situation, divorced him, leaving him in a difficult situation. Susie wasn't the only wife he had comforted during marital troubles. A couple of weeks after finding him with his wife in a hotel room, I encountered Pill in a bar. I suggested he might face a serious accident when his divorce was finalized, and he started selling off his remaining possessions. Soon, he left town, and not many people seemed to miss him. Occasionally, I bump into Susie on the streets, and she apologizes, asking if I'll call her to talk. I just nod and walk away. To this day, I haven't called her, though she continues to ask. Maybe someday I'll decide to call her. Story 2. My wife and I have been together for 2 decades. We first met during our freshman year of high school and have been inseparable ever since. We shared many milestones, from losing our purity to each other, to attending prom, and even going to the same college after graduation. After finishing college, we got married and settled down to build our life together. Starting a family was always part of our plan, and when we secured good jobs, we decided to make that dream a reality. Fast forward 11 years, and we now have 2 kids, own our home, and are on a path to early retirement for travel and other experiences we've longed for. Everything seemed like a dream until tragedy struck. My sister-in-law was diagnosed with lung cancer. She was not just family, but also my wife's best friend. My wife supported her throughout her fight against the disease, but sadly, she eventually passed away. It was a devastating blow to our entire family, my wife especially. My sister-in-law was a beacon of light in our lives. My wife took it the hardest because they were incredibly close, sharing everything from shopping trips to personal secrets. I stood by my wife during her grief, helping her navigate through the toughest period of her life. After about 6 months, she started to recover. During her mourning, she read through her sister's journals and notebooks, trying to understand the emotions and provide support. What hit my wife deeply was the feeling that her sister hadn't accomplished enough in her life, taken too soon. Reading the journal entries made my wife realize her sister's unfulfilled aspirations. Motivated by her sister's untimely departure, my wife expressed a newfound determination to live life fully. She wanted to travel, experience skydiving, and savor every moment. I wholeheartedly supported this mindset, aligning with the reason I had been working 60 hours a week since college to retire early. In the coming weeks, my wife embraced this philosophy, taking pottery classes, teaching herself rock climbing, and even planning a bungee jumping adventure for her and our son. It seemed like she was fully embracing this new adventurous lifestyle. I didn't pay much attention to it. I felt happy for her as she was recovering from the loss of her sister. However, one evening after she returned from the climbing gym, her behavior seemed different. Before that, she had been enthusiastic and positive about embracing a new chapter in her life. After dinner, when the kids were in their rooms, she took me out to the patio. We shared a couple of glasses of wine and gazed at the stars. Towards the end of our conversation, she brought up the idea of both of us having a hall pass. For those unfamiliar, a hall pass in a committed monogamous relationship is a one-time opportunity for both partners to have closeness with someone outside the relationship. I was completely taken aback by her suggestion. It seemed to come out of nowhere. So I asked her why she was bringing it up. She reassured me that she loved me, but felt like she might be missing out on a part of life because she had only ever been with me. She tried to phrase it in a way that wouldn't hurt me, but it was impossible not to feel terrible when she said that. I expressed my lack of support for the idea. We had been married for 20 years, and I couldn't understand why it suddenly became an issue. I had no desire to be with anyone else, and I wasn't comfortable with her being with someone else either. We were about to go back inside, but I paused and asked her if there was someone she was interested in. She hesitated to tell me the truth, but after a few moments, she admitted that there was someone at the climbing gym she found attractive. She mentioned he had been flirty, and he recently invited her out for drinks. Although she assured me that she declined and made it clear she was married, I went to bed that night feeling uneasy. It took a few days for me to come to terms with what she had suggested. I was deeply hurt, but eventually I forgave her, and we pretended the conversation never happened. About a week later, she told me about an outdoor climbing class offered by the gym, and she wanted to sign up for it. One Saturday, she left early in the morning for the class, or at least that's what I thought. Since our daughter had started lying about her whereabouts, we asked her to leave her location on Snapchat Maps for verification. That afternoon, when our daughter claimed she was going to a friend's house, I checked the maps. Everything seemed fine on our daughter's end, but I noticed my wife's avatar was in the heart of the city. I was a bit perplexed because I had been informed that she was heading to a park about 30 minutes outside of the city. Checking the location, I discovered she was at a bar. I tried to make sense of it, thinking she might be hanging out with people from the climbing gym after their climb. However, a sinking feeling in my gut couldn't be ignored, recalling what she had mentioned about a guy from her climbing gym inviting her for drinks. Wondering if she was there with him wasn't too much of a stretch. I was home alone, and the bar happened to be about a 15-minute walk from the house, so I took the dog for a walk, keeping an eye on the map. Upon reaching the bar, I peered through the windows and saw my wife sitting at a table with a man, leaning close and smiling as they chatted for 2 years. The man reached across the table, holding my wife's hand, and she allowed it. While hand-holding isn't necessarily cheating, it hinted at something more. I went home before my wife spotted me there and waited for her return. Throughout the wait, I was undecided on whether to confront her or investigate on my own. When she came home and, before saying anything to me, went straight to the shower, I tried to initiate a conversation, but she dismissed me, citing post-climbing sweat. This confirmed in my mind that something had happened while she was with that man. She had left her gym bag near our bed, and I noticed her phone was still inside. I pulled it out and searched for information about the man, checking her text messages. I found a chat with an unsaved number starting about a week before she asked me about the hall pass. Scanning through the messages for keywords indicating an affair, I found a few exchanged pictures and explicit messages. Then I saw plans for them to meet at the bar, even coming up with a lie to tell me and his partner. I had no idea who the guy was, but I discovered him by checking the climbing gym's social media, where he was clearly featured in some pictures. He was tagged in everything, and through some digging, I learned he was married with a newborn baby. I was disgusted by what I discovered. Hurt doesn't even begin to describe the pain I felt. I had been with my wife for 20 years, and she was willing to throw all of that away because she wanted to be with another man. I was furious and utterly disgusted by the reprehensible actions of both of them. At the end of their message chain, there was the name of a restaurant, along with a date and time. A week had passed since I found out my wife was cheating on me, and I devised a plan to catch her in the act. While contemplating it, I realized that the wife of her affair partner deserved to know as well. On the day of the planned meeting, I sent a dozen roses to the partner's wife, including details about the restaurant on the card. I hoped it would make her believe he had a surprise for her. Waiting outside the restaurant, I observed her heading in. I followed her inside, and we both noticed our partners holding hands simultaneously. She hurried over, started yelling at him in front of everyone. My wife was surprised to see me, but she quickly got up, insisting it wasn't what it seemed. I asked her to explain the text messages, and she fell silent. I informed her that I was ending our relationship and that she could expect to see me in court. We spent the next 8 months in a divorce battle, mainly over custody. Both of us wanted primary custody, but we ended up with joint custody. I kept the house, and she received no spousal payments. Her affair partner, also divorced, had to pay child support and alimony to his ex. My ex-wife and I recently finalized the divorce proceedings, and we are finally done with each other. I honestly don't know how to move forward. Having only been with one woman and feeling betrayed, I'm unsure about the next steps. My girlfriend and I were together for 3 years before everything fell apart. I believed she was the one and planned to marry her, but she cheated on me with my cousin. It all began when we met at a nightclub 3 years ago. She was the hottest woman there, and I didn't think I had a chance, but I tried anyway. Surprisingly, she was interested, and we've been together since. She moved into my apartment a year and a half into our relationship, and I didn't question it because I was deeply in love. Then, my cousin, who used to live down south, got a job in New York. I helped him get an apartment in my building, excited to have family close by. We were good friends, often playing games online. I thought it would be nice having family nearby once he settled in, and we hung out quite often. He never hid that he found my girlfriend attractive, but I never thought he'd act on his feelings. I never noticed anything going on between them while I was around. They respected each other's space. A few months after he moved in, I was grabbing coffee with a friend, and my cousin showed up with his new girlfriend, who happened to be my girlfriend's work friend. We tried to set them up at a party, but it didn't seem to be going well. They were keeping things low profile, not wanting to pressure their relationship. Finding it amusing, I wanted to surprise my girlfriend with the news. I texted her to come to the cafe for a surprise, but she replied that she couldn't because she was hanging out with her friend. Ironically, the friend she claimed to be with was sitting across from me at the cafe. She lied about her whereabouts, and I, in turn, lied to my friends about her having a migraine. When I got home, she was nowhere to be seen. However, I noticed makeup on the bed, and she had clearly tried on a couple of outfits. I felt really nervous, thinking something was going on that I didn't know about, and I needed to talk to someone. I walked down the hall to chat with my cousin. Despite loud music playing in the background, I knocked on the door persistently until he heard me. After some shuffling, he opened the door, trying to dismiss it by saying he had company and would come over later. Once again, I had no reason to believe my girlfriend was cheating on me with my cousin, so I didn't assume it was her in there. It only dawned on me when I saw a shirt I bought her for her birthday on the arm of the couch behind my cousin. I played it cool, nodded my head, and returned to my apartment immediately. Once there, I searched for any other signs of cheating. Eventually, I went into her laptop, checking her Facebook messages with my cousin. Doing that completely shattered my heart. In the messages, my cousin asked her what she liked about me. She mentioned finding me funny with a good personality, but he insisted I wasn't her type, claiming he was. My girlfriend didn't disagree. They were extremely flirty, and at one point, she messaged him the classic "just got out of the shower" message. After that, they exchanged suggestive pictures with very explicit messages. Earlier that day, my cousin had messaged her, expressing his inability to stop thinking about her and his need to be with her. He instructed her to come up with an excuse to visit his apartment, and she did. Realizing it was over between my girlfriend and me, I decided to cut my cousin off entirely from my life, leaving no trace for everyone I knew. I captured screenshots of everything I saw, sending them to myself just in case my girlfriend attempted to lie. Fortunately, my name was on the lease, and hers wasn't since she moved into my apartment. This meant I could at least kick her out. When she came home a few hours later, I immediately told her to leave. Confused, she asked why, and I revealed that I had discovered her involvement with my cousin. I insisted she vacate the apartment or face legal action. I left for the night, giving her a 48-hour notice to leave. During my absence, both she and my cousin called me numerous times, but I ignored every call. Meanwhile, I gathered all my relatives in a group chat and disclosed everything about the situation. Everyone, including my cousin's parents, expressed deep disappointment and offered apologies, though they weren't directly involved. I received several messages from my cousin, calling me a coward and claiming family members labeled him a pig. I didn't care. He was, indeed, a pig. Since my girlfriend and I shared many friends, I created a group chat and informed them of the incident. They were shocked and firmly sided with me. Some girls in the chat revealed that my girlfriend had tried to call them seeking a place to stay. Despite feeling bad, they declined, as they didn't believe her actions were justified. Returning 2 days later, I found my girlfriend had left the apartment. Unsure of her whereabouts, I discovered that she stayed with my cousin. However, their personalities clashed, and he kicked her out after a week. After that, I lost track of where she went. I guess I learned that you really can't put your trust in just anyone, not even family. I'm Jason, and I had a 5-year relationship with my ex-girlfriend Bella. We met at a unisex salon where she worked as a hairdresser, and we hit it off from the start. Although I liked her initially, I never expected our connection to grow into a deep love. After several visits to the salon, I gathered the courage to ask for her number, and she agreed since we were already familiar with each other. The typical story unfolded. We went out, got to know each other, and eventually fell in love. Our decision to not rush into settling down early stemmed from my past heartbreak with an ex-girlfriend. I wanted to take things slow with Bella. After 5 years of dating, I felt it was time to make our commitment official. 2 months before the wedding, Bella surprised me with the news that she was pregnant. While it wasn't part of our original plan, I welcomed it as a blessing. Initially, Bella and I had agreed to wait 3 to 4 years after marriage to have a child. She had experienced 2 feticides in the past, and I wanted to avoid that for her. Despite the unexpected joy of impending parenthood, planning a wedding and expecting a child simultaneously wasn't easy. Bella insisted on the grand wedding she had always dreamed of, with an expensive venue, gown, and other costly elements. While she had saved money for the wedding, I thought it made more sense to allocate our budget towards securing a home for our growing family and addressing other essential needs. However, she believed in making our wedding a once-in-a-lifetime event, arguing that we had many years ahead to focus on our child. After considering her perspective, we proceeded with the wedding she envisioned. We booked the venue, paid for the cake she desired, and she covered expenses like her gown, hairdo, and other necessities with her bridesmaids. Despite my internal reservations, I was genuinely excited about the upcoming events. I was about to marry the woman I loved, and I was thrilled that, in our 5 years of dating, she had never betrayed my trust. I thought she was a faithful partner who would stay true to me as we aged together. Unfortunately, I was mistaken. I delved too deeply into the future while my present was already a mess. Unbeknownst to me, as I smoothly planned our wedding, investing my savings to create her dream ceremony, Bella was cheating on me with someone close. I wouldn't have discovered this if her jealous lover hadn't confessed the night before our wedding. That evening, as I returned home early to prepare for my bachelor's party, my best man called, requesting a meeting to share something important. We agreed to meet at a nearby coffee shop. When we sat down, he looked uneasy, apologized in advance, and said he needed to get something off his chest. I feared he might cancel on me the night before my wedding, but what he revealed was worse. He disclosed his history with Bella, claiming he loved her too much to witness our marriage. At first, I thought it was a prank, searching for hidden cameras or friends recording us. However, he showed me a sensual picture of him and Bella, and my heart sank. He also shared a text from Bella about sneaking into her hotel room later that night for our wedding. Seeing that message dispelled all my doubts, and I tried to contain my hurt as a man, but tears welled up. The revelations continued. He admitted to being responsible for Bella's pregnancy. They planned for her to tell me it was mine, avoiding suspicion and preventing a breakup. At that moment, my world seemed to come to a standstill. Countless thoughts raced through my mind, making it tough to accept that the woman I loved and held high expectations for in our relationship was carrying my best man's child. I was furious, imagining if my anger were visible, my best man would have seen smoke. When I'd heard enough, I exploded in anger, throwing the chair I sat on and storming out. Trying to control my rage, I punched him when he followed and grabbed my arm. Then I drove off. In my car, I called the wedding venue to cancel, managing to get home. Our wedding never happened, and I can't forgive her for what she did. All my efforts and sacrifices of 5 years vanished. I yearn for legal recourse for heartbreaks and infidelity, wishing to drag her to court to make her pay for the wasted years and pain she caused. We haven't seen each other, and she lacked the courage to face me after I called off the wedding. I moved into the house I rented for us as a surprise, healing and moving forward daily. Surprisingly, my former close friend and best man tried to apologize and explain their affair, but I wasn't interested. I told him we could no longer be friends, and he had no place in my life. Since then, we haven't made contact, and I'll never speak to him again, considering it childish. But I don't care. Bella didn't keep his child. She aborted it as payback, and they are no longer together. I've learned my lesson, and won't love deeply again. At times, I wish I had invested my resources and sacrifices in my life, a far better use than wasting them on a promiscuous woman. But as they say, where there is life, there is hope.
Six months earlier, life had taken a cruel twist, and I'd found myself in the middle of a storm I never anticipated. It started innocently enough, a routine day at work, the usual hum of activity around me. That afternoon, a heated argument with my wife, Kathy, unfolded over the phone. Her voice carried an edge of frustration I hadn't heard before. "We need to talk when you get home," she said sharply before abruptly ending the call. I'd assumed it was about our dwindling finances or another mundane concern, but the truth was far darker. That evening, Her admission shattered me. "I've been seeing someone else," she confessed, unable to meet my gaze. The words struck like a thunderclap. My anger, disbelief, and confusion battled for dominance, leaving me speechless. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the unraveling of the life I'd meticulously built with her. To add salt to the wound, the man she'd been involved with was none other than Bob, a supposed friend who'd shared our dinner table countless times. Over the next few weeks, emotions ran high. I tried to salvage what was left of our marriage, attending counseling sessions and making compromises, but Kathy's heart was no longer in it. The cracks in our relationship widened until they became impossible to bridge. Friends and family offered their condolences, but their words only deepened my sense of isolation. The house, once a sanctuary, became a prison of memories. It wasn't long before the divorce proceedings began, each court appearance another wound. Kathy's demands were relentless, and Bob's presence added fuel to the fire. He flaunted his newfound connection with her, unapologetically inserting himself into the proceedings. My lawyer advised me to keep my composure, but every encounter left me simmering with anger. The final straw came when Bob had the audacity to confront me at a neighborhood event, taunting me with veiled threats and smug remarks. My fists clenched, and it took every ounce of self-control to walk away. That night, I sat alone, replaying the events in my mind. Something in me snapped, and I realized I needed to fight back, not with violence, but by regaining control of my life. In the weeks that followed, I channeled my anger into rebuilding myself. The gym became my haven. Each weight lifted a step toward reclaiming my strength. I sought solace in hobbies I'd abandoned years ago, finding moments of peace in woodworking and running. Friends who drifted away slowly returned, and I began to rebuild the social circle I'd neglected during my marriage. Slowly but surely, I was piecing myself back together. Despite the progress, the wounds Kathy and Bob left were slow to heal. Nights were the hardest, the silence amplifying the echoes of betrayal. But amidst the turmoil, I found hope in my children. Their laughter, their innocence, reminded me of what truly mattered. I resolved to be the father they needed, someone they could depend on in a world that had already shown them its harsh side. By the time I reached that prison cell months later, I'd learned one important lesson. No matter how broken life may seem, it's possible to rebuild. And that's exactly what I intended to do, one day at a time, starting with my release. It was close to the dead of night, about 2 a.m. The halls were dimly lit, with only the faintest glow from a few scattered lights breaking through the heavy darkness. In my cramped, starkly furnished cell, faint silhouettes of the sparse items inside surrounded me. I lay on the hard cot, hands cradling the back of my head, as thoughts swirled relentlessly, keeping sleep at bay. My mind wandered to places I had tried to lock away, dredging up memories I wished would stay buried. The eerie quiet was broken by the sound of measured footsteps. I counted them, 1, 2, 3, all the way to 10, before a figure came into view. His expressionless face betrayed no emotion, much like the others here. This was just another night on his patrol, a mundane routine that didn't require him to notice me, nor did I expect him to. As he passed my cell, I stopped keeping track of the time. It wouldn't matter. I knew he wouldn't return for nearly an hour and a half. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about life after this place. 5 days and a wake-up, and I'd walk out of here for good. 7 months of a 1-year sentence were behind me. My job would be waiting, but everything else would be different. My brother Gary had kept my life afloat, fixing my car, managing my house, and preserving what little money was left after legal fees. Was I angry? That didn't even cover it, but I kept those feelings locked away for now. I understood why long sentences leave men hollow. Humanity doesn't survive here. It's just survival. And this prison was easy compared to the hardcore facility up north. I closed my eyes, hoping for sleep. I missed my old bedroom, the one with blackout curtains. That room, and the life I had known, was gone for good. Gary had visited me at the center. Through the plexiglass, he said, "I'll pick you up next Tuesday. Anything special you want to eat?" "A big steak, medium rare," I replied. He laughed. "That's easy. Thought you'd ask for something tougher to sneak past my wife." Gary had offered me a room at his place while I got back on my feet. "It won't be fancy," he added, "but it's clean and you'll have your freedom." I thanked him. He brushed it off. "We're family. Don't worry about Mom and Dad. They'll come around. Eventually." But we both knew that wasn't guaranteed. The wounds in our family ran deep. "Seen my kids?" I asked. "Yeah," Gary said. Heather's the same, but John's got that awful bowl haircut everyone likes now. Told him it looked like crap, but he said I wasn't his dad and didn't have to listen. If Mom hadn't been there, I'd have slapped him. John wouldn't have dared talk like that if I'd been around. He and his sister would stay with their mom for now. The divorce was final, but Kathy owed me $65,000 for my share of the house. She'd probably already emptied our lockbox, but my lawyer had everything listed. There'd be no argument when I got out. Kathy and my ex-friend Bob had blindsided me, wrecking my life. That was over. Next time, I'd be ready. I just had to survive a few more days here before starting fresh. Maybe then I could rebuild. I hoped so. Before all this, life had been good, really good. I never saw the betrayal coming. Some friends later admitted they'd known but kept quiet. Did they think I knew and didn't care? More likely, they didn't want to get involved. Most people don't. Now, all I could do was wait, plan, and hope for a better chapter ahead. I thought we had a great marriage. 12 years, 2 kids, a nice house, and jobs we could be proud of. Sure, we had the occasional argument, but nothing unusual. I loved my wife deeply and never imagined what she was capable of. Our social circle was small, mostly neighborhood couples like us. Most had kids, except Bob and Connie, who had struggled to conceive for years. Kathy probably knew why, but I stayed out of it. Connie's drinking, though, had become everyone's problem. At parties, her booze intake spiraled, turning melancholy into mean. Bob stayed sober, often carrying her home by the end of the night. Connie was something else tonight, I said one evening, getting ready for bed. She even asked Greg to help her strip down and jump in the pool. No wonder he and Judy left early. Poor Bob, Kathy replied as she tossed her clothes on the chair. Connie blamed their childlessness on Bob, a cruel and baseless accusation. Adoption was a suggestion she refused to entertain. If my husband were more of a man, we wouldn't be in this mess, she once snapped. I didn't know what to say. They'll either fix it or split, I told Kathy. Bob won't take much more. We're having dinner with them next week, she reminded me. I groaned. Let's hope she behaves, I muttered, doubting it. When dinner night came, Connie was as disruptive as ever. Waiter, how's a girl supposed to get a drink? She yelled, drawing stares. Then she turned on Bob, berating him loudly. His face flushed with anger, fists clenched under the table. To diffuse the tension, I stood and said, Connie, you promised me a dance. She hesitated, but let me lead her to the dance floor. We swayed through a few songs, or rather, I held her upright. Eventually, she muttered, I need to pee. I guided her to the restroom and waited outside. After 5 minutes, I asked 2 women entering to check on her. One came back, shaking her head. She's passed out in a stall, she said. I sighed, wondering how much longer Bob would endure this chaos. With help, I got Connie to the sink and splashed cold water on her face. She stirred briefly but couldn't stand, so I half-carried her back to the table. Bob's face showed equal parts embarrassment and frustration. Bob, let me help you get her to the car, I said, still supporting her. I've got it, Steve, he snapped, his voice tight. This isn't the first time, but it'll be the last. Ignoring him, I helped carry Connie out while he grabbed her purse and muttered a quick goodbye. We loaded her into the back seat, and I gave Bob a pat on the shoulder. Sorry, man, I said, unsure of what else to offer. Bob sighed. Thanks, I'm at my wit's end. I don't know what to do anymore. You need counseling, I suggested. Neither of you can handle this alone. Kathy and I are here if you need support. He nodded, but I doubted they'd follow through. Their marriage seemed doomed, and I figured it was only a matter of time. 3 weeks later, sirens broke the quiet of a Thursday night. Flashing lights lit up the end of the block. I ran outside to find Bob's car smashed into a parked vehicle. Firefighters were prying open the driver's door. What happened? I asked a neighbor. It's Connie, they said. They fought. She grabbed the keys, sped off, and crashed. I watched paramedics load her into an ambulance. Bob climbed in after her, his face a mix of worry and exhaustion. Their house, now chaotic with lights blazing and furniture overturned, told the rest of the story. The next morning, Kathy called me, frantic. Connie's on life support. Meet me at the hospital. When I arrived, Bob sat in the waiting room, hollow-eyed and broken. The doctors say there is almost no brain activity, he said quietly. We sat in silence as Connie's parents arrived. Their grief filled the room as they spoke with the doctor. Hours later, the decision was made to turn off the machines. 48 hours later, surrounded by loved ones, Connie passed peacefully. The funeral was packed, tears flowing freely. Despite the struggles of the past year, Bob's love for Connie was clear. He took a month off work to visit family, and I promised to look after his place. Later that night, while getting ready for bed, I turned to Kathy. "I love you. You know that, right?" She smiled, tired but warm. "If I ever end up like Connie, pull the plug. I wouldn't want to live like that." "Don't talk like that," I said. "It was a tragic mistake, but it could never happen to us." Still, the events of the past weeks lingered in my mind as I held her close, grateful for the life we shared. Bob returned a couple of weeks later, trying to piece his life back together. He asked Kathy to help him sort through Connie's clothes, and I helped him remove his old bedroom furniture when he bought a new set. By 3 months in, he seemed to be finding his footing. Our neighbors made an effort to keep him involved in social gatherings and even set him up on a few blind dates, though nothing stuck. It was too soon. Life moved forward, or so it seemed. 6 months later, Bob had a spark in his eye again. Seeing him smile and enjoy himself at gatherings was a relief. It felt like we had our old friend back. But looking back, there were signs, subtle ones, that something wasn't right. Kathy and I were still close, but I sensed a distance I couldn't quite explain. One evening I asked, "Is something bothering you?" "Not really," Kathy said with a smile. "Well, why do you ask?" "You just seem a little off lately," I said carefully. "Everything's fine," she insisted. "Maybe you're just not getting enough Zex. If you want more, just ask." Zex? She'd never called it that before. It was always making love. I brushed off the unease and let it go. Then came Friday, August 20th, the day everything fell apart. Kathy called me at work saying the kids would be at her parents' for the weekend. "What time will you be home?" she asked. "I'll come home early," I said, excited for what I thought would be a romantic weekend. I arrived home to find 2 cars in the driveway, one of them Bob's. Inside, Kathy and Bob stood in the kitchen. "Hey, Bob," I greeted him, confused. "What's going on?" "Steve, we need to talk," Kathy said, her voice trembling. "About what?" I asked, uneasy. "Divorce," she said, barely audible. The word hit me like a freight train. "What are you talking about? Divorce?" I demanded. "I'm in love with Bob," she admitted, wringing her hands. Rage surged through me. "Bob, get the hell out of my house, now!" "Steve, this involves him too," Kathy said, stepping closer to Bob. "Get out before I make you leave in a body bag," I warned, fists clenched. Bob hesitated, then turned to go. Kathy tried to follow. "Kathy, we're talking now," I shouted. "There's nothing to talk about," she said. "I'm sorry, but it's over." "How long has this been going on? Before Connie's end of life," I yelled. Bob turned, anger flashing in his eyes. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I know. While I was supporting you, you were sneaking behind my back. You disgust me." I demanded they both leave. "This is my house too," Kathy said defiantly. "Not anymore," I shot back. "Get out." Bob urged her toward the door. "Let's go," he said. "You'll regret this," I spat as they backed out the door, avoiding my glare. As they left, I stood in the kitchen, my world shattered, vowing they wouldn't get away with this betrayal. I lost it after that. 2 beers in, I smashed dishes, broke the microwave, and put holes in 4 walls. Not bad for 2 hours of rage. 4 trips later, I had emptied Kathy's closet, dumped everything on the lawn, and turned on the sprinklers for good measure. I locked the doors, put on the chains, and drank 4 more beers while listening to Kathy scream outside. By beer 6, I passed out, waking up the next morning to find her things gone. At least I didn't have to drag them to the curb. Still, I was devastated, and angrier with every passing thought. When I called Kathy's parents to check on the kids, her mom shut me down. "Kathy picked them up last night," she said. "Nonsense, Fran. She was busy collecting her clothes off the lawn," I roared. She hung up. Furious, I canceled our credit cards, withdrew as much cash as possible, and planned my day. Changed the garage code, install new locks, and move valuables to my brother Gary's house. While preparing to leave, the doorbell rang. A man with a large envelope waited outside. I didn't answer. I knew he'd catch me eventually, just not today. I called Gary, filled him in, and told him to keep the valuables under wraps. He sympathized, calling Kathy a piece of work. Then I headed to Home Depot for new locks. Driving home, I spotted Bob's car in my driveway, Kathy loading things into it. Rage overtook me. Instead of passing by, I floored it. My car slammed into Bob's, shoving it into the garage door. I reversed, hit him again, and finally drove his car halfway through the garage before my engine stalled. Adrenaline pumping, I grabbed my son's bat and started swinging. Bob cowered in the driver's seat as I shattered windows and cracked the windshield. I was about to rip open his door when I heard shouting. Drop the bat and put your hands on your head." I turned to see 2 officers, tools drawn. I dropped the bat, complied, and was cuffed on the garage floor. Bob crawled out, pale and trembling, while Kathy sobbed nearby, talking to the police and glancing at me. I smiled at her. At the station, I was booked and given 1 phone call. I called Gary. With it being the weekend, I spent 2 nights in jail. On Monday, I faced a judge, pleaded not guilty, and had bail set. By late afternoon, Gary got me out. "They're talking about attempted homicide or attack with a deadly weapon," Gary said as we left. "I know," I replied. "First stop, the bank." By the time we arrived at the bank, Kathy had already drained our savings and checking accounts. The CDs and bonds in the lockbox remained untouched, but a court order barred me from accessing them. Frustrated, I called her cell. "You could have left me $5, I said, my voice tight with anger. "You're cheap, you know that?" "I need the money for me and the kids," Kathy replied evenly. "Until the rest is released, I don't have much choice." "Doesn't Bob make enough for you?" I snapped back. "I still have a house payment. Maybe I should light a fire in the living room to warm it up." "Steve, stop talking crazy," she said, her tone shifting to concern. "Why can't you just move on?" "I will," I shot back, "once you send my kids back." "I can't, not with you in this state," she said. "I don't think you'd hurt them, but I can't take the chance. You'll see them after this settles." "You don't need to worry about them," I said sharply. "You and Bob, though, that's another story." "I'm done talking," Kathy said firmly. "From now on, go through my attorney." A moment later, the line went dead. At my court date weeks later, my lawyer pleaded temporary insanity, arguing that Kathy's confession about Bob had made me snap. Kathy and Bob testified that I'd threatened them, citing the restraining order as proof of their fear. "Mr. Moore," the judge asked, "did you tell Mr. Kelly he'd leave in a body bag?" "I don't recall exactly," I replied. "But how would you feel if your wife was sleeping with your friend?" The judge wasn't impressed, and my lawyer scolded me. "Say nothing more. Forget everything you said or did." My boss, Chris, testified as a character witness, calling me a model employee. His words helped, but after closing arguments, the judge postponed his ruling. The next day, Chris pulled me aside. "Steve, I know guys who can make them disappear." "Thanks," I said. "But this is my problem." 6 months and $12,000 later, I was divorced. Kathy got half of everything, the house was sold, and even her false claim about missing jewelry didn't stick. But the system wasn't done with me. The judge sentenced me to a year in jail. "That's insane," I yelled at my lawyer. "It could have been worse," he said. "With good behavior, you'll be out in 8 months, and the charge will clear in 2 years. Do your time and move on." Easier said than done. Appeals went nowhere, and my life had crumbled in under a year. Before I turned myself in, Chris reassured me, "Your job's waiting, stay smart and watch your back." On Sunday, I saw my kids one last time, then reported to the county jail. Despite my research, nothing prepared me for the reality. Gary deposited money into my inmate account, but it mostly went to junk food and basic supplies. Without a phone or computer, I started writing to pass the time. Collect calls every 2 weeks kept me in touch with my family. During a visit, Gary said, "I'll have your car fixed before you're out." I also had the deadbolts installed and told Kathy she needs to give 24 hours notice if she wants to stop by. His support helped, but I still had months ahead to endure, thanks to Kathy and Bob. Gary had my back, and I was thankful. Kathy had taken the kids' clothes and hers, but stopped short of furniture after Gary told her she'd need a court order. She'd let my parents see the kids every other Sunday, but made it clear it was a courtesy. According to my mom, Kathy called me their jailbird father and made it clear she'd set strict visitation terms once I was out. With a week left, I confirmed my visitation schedule, every other weekend, a month in summer, and alternating holidays. I let Chris know I'd need a week to get back on track after my release. The day I traded my jumpsuit for street clothes felt incredible. Gary was waiting outside, and we headed to the first bar we saw. "To freedom," I said, clinking bottles. Gary smiled. "Andy's got a steak dinner waiting for you. You can crash with us for a few nights before sorting things at the house. It's still on the market, but no offers yet. Kathy wants to drop the price. Needs your approval." Dinner was amazing. I ate and drank more than I had in 8 months. By morning, I regretted it. A note from Gary awaited me in the kitchen. "If you're reading this, you survived. Coffee's ready, and everything else is in the fridge. Keys to your car and house are by the back door. Don't do anything stupid. See you at 5:30. After coffee, a shower, and a shave, I felt human again. Dressed in fresh clothes, I headed to the house. The exterior looked the same, but stepping inside, it was a mess. Clothes were scattered, furniture missing, and the kitchen had long-expired food in the fridge. The sight of the wall where I'd punched during my fight with Kathy and Bob brought back memories. I rubbed my knuckles, recalling the betrayal that led to my anger. Upstairs, the kids' closets were empty except for a few forgotten items. My bedroom was stripped bare except for my dresser. The dark spots on the carpet where the bed and Kathy's furniture once stood made the room feel cold, lifeless. It wasn't mine anymore. It would need a complete overhaul. Downstairs, I sat at the kitchen table and made a list of repairs, cleaning, and replacements. I tucked the list in my pocket and headed to the bank. The lockbox was, unsurprisingly, empty. I requested documentation of the withdrawal and learned the bank had video footage of the lockbox area if needed. Another blow, but not unexpected. It was time to rebuild, on my own terms. A call to my attorney confirmed Kathy had taken everything. The good news, he said, is the court ordered her to return the CDs and bonds to the lockbox. She wants to trade her share of the house for your share of the CDs and bonds, he added. Tell her to comply with the order, or I'll have her arrested, I said firmly. Back at the house, I took stock of the damage. I called Hank, a contractor, to repair the walls, and Mary maids for a deep cleaning, especially in the kitchen and dining room where I'd trashed everything. Thankfully, the utilities were still on, so I planned to move back in after buying a bed. Mattress shopping was overwhelming, but I settled on a basic set for $900. At least it wouldn't have bad memories attached. When Hank arrived, he inspected the walls. Must have hurt hitting that stud, he said with a grin. I just want it patched and painted, I told him. How's $200? He offered. That's low, I replied. Steve, after what you did to Bob's car, you're a legend in the neighborhood. You're a hero, he said, insisting on the price. I thanked him, though he couldn't fully understand what I'd been through. Within 6 weeks, the house was repaired, cleaned, and the CDs and bonds were back in the lockbox. Life felt like it was slowly returning to normal. When the kids stayed for their first weekend, it was awkward at first. Breaking the silence, I told them, "This is still your home. Speak your mind. You won't hurt my feelings." John said, "We love you, Dad. We're sorry about what Mom did." Heather nodded. "We didn't know about Bob until we had to live with him. We didn't like it then, and we don't like it now." "It wasn't your fault," I reassured them. "What your mom and I had is over, but I'll always be your dad. I love you, and I'm here for you." We ended the night with pizza and a movie, and for the first time in months, it felt like a family again. I resisted the urge to badmouth their mother. It wasn't the right time. Instead, I focused on helping John ditch his bowl cut and supporting them in soccer and dance, filling my time with their activities. While friends urged me to move on and start fresh, I wasn't ready. I wasted 14 years on her, I'd tell them. If I want to stay mad, that's my right. Kathy pushed to lower the house price. I refused. If you want to knock $20,000 off your share, fine, I said. Otherwise, it stays. Eventually, we divided the CDs and bonds. Kathy blew through her share in 3 months on a new car and a vacation with Bob. I banked mine, determined to rebuild on my terms. Roughly 8.5 months after my release from jail, Bob's house was engulfed in flames. According to the investigation, someone had poured gasoline into the electrical panel and along the back of the property before setting it alight while the family was out at a soccer game. By the time the fire was extinguished, the rear half of the house was a charred ruin and the entire property was left without electricity. The very next day, 2 officers appeared at my doorstep and brought me to the station for questioning. "Steve, you were just a block away," one officer said, his tone sharp with suspicion. "You could have easily slipped over there and done this." I met his gaze steadily. "Then prove it." They threw out more accusations, trying to rattle me, but I let them talk themselves in circles. When I'd had enough, I stood and said firmly, "I think we're done here." The bigger officer leaned forward, clearly trying to intimidate me. "Mr. Moore, we're not finished. Then either charge me, let me go, or watch me call my lawyer. I'm not saying another word without legal counsel," I replied, pulling out my phone. The 2 exchanged a glance before the smaller cop reluctantly spoke. "We'll release you, but don't think for a second we're not watching." As they let me leave, I couldn't help but feel a small victory. 1 problem down, a couple more to tackle. Since Bob's home was uninhabitable, I stepped up and offered to take care of the kids for a while. With the house repairs estimated to take a couple of months, I treated the time as an extended break for the three of us. One evening, as Kathy came by to pick up the kids, she didn't waste time getting to the point. "Steve, I know you're behind the fire no matter what the police decide." Feigning ignorance, I raised an eyebrow. "I don't know what you're talking about. I spent the whole day with our friends. Or should I say my friends now? Funny how you and Bob don't get invited anymore. Should I speak to them for you?" "Don't bother. We wouldn't show up even if they begged," she shot back, her bitterness palpable. "Well," I said with a smirk, "at least you and Bob have each other. That's what really matters, right? For now, anyway." "What do you mean by that?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "Nothing, just saying you're lucky to have him." This time I didn't bother hiding my grin. As the kids grew closer to me, Kathy and Bob's frustration seemed to deepen. The kids often confided in me about fights at home, shouting at Bob to stop pretending to be their father. Kathy's efforts to mediate only made things worse. One evening, Kathy called me. "Steve, stop stirring things up between Bob and the kids," she demanded, her voice tight with irritation. "I don't know what you're talking about," I replied, keeping my tone deliberately cool. "I've never spoken ill of you. I've told them you're their mom and they need to respect and listen to you." "And Bob," she shot back, her tone sharp. "Bob?" I repeated, letting the word hang in the air for a moment. "Well, he's a backstabbing, spineless idiot who never should have made it past childhood. Aside from that, he's fine." Her sharp intake of breath crackled over the line. "He's good to your kids, Steve. Leave him out of it." "That's not going to happen," I said, my voice hardening. "The man means nothing to me, and someday I'll gladly be the one to spit on his grave." "Steve, I swear," she started, but I cut her off. "What's left, Kathy?" I snapped, my tone icy. "Cheat on me again? Divorce me? Get me locked up? You've already done it all, haven't you? There's nothing more you can do." She hung up in fury, and I couldn't help but mutter to myself, hard to believe I once loved that woman. Work, on the other hand, was going smoothly. Within a few weeks of being back, I was caught up, and my boss, Chris, encouraged me to take on more responsibilities. I agreed, given that I had plenty of free time. While most of the new accounts were straightforward, one, TBU Inc., posed some challenges. The company was overhauling their manufacturing system, which required frequent visits to stay updated. Unfortunately, the engineer assigned to me, though knowledgeable, was a disorganized mess, and I wasn't getting the data I needed. "Chris," I told him, "I hate to complain, but if I don't get the right information, this project is going to hit a wall." After a few calls, the company assigned Monica Bradley, a seasoned process engineer, to work with me. "Steve," she said, introducing herself with a handshake. Working with Monica was a breath of fresh air. She ensured I had what I needed, no matter what it took. 2 weeks before Phase 1 wrapped up, I decided to thank her with dinner. "Monica, let me take you and your husband out to dinner. The Hilton where I'm staying has a fantastic restaurant. How about 6 o'clock? She agreed, and we shook hands before I left the plant at 4:30, eager for the evening ahead. Back at the hotel, I spent an hour plowing through emails, wondering how anyone managed life before the internet. At 5:55 p.m., I made my way to the restaurant, feeling calm and ready for the evening. Once seated, I glanced at the menu as I waited for Monica and her husband to arrive. Right on time at 6, Monica entered the room, but she was alone. I waved her over and stood to greet her. "Is your husband parking the car?" I asked casually, pulling out her chair. Her lips curled into a faint smile. "Steve, I'm not married." Caught off guard, I hesitated. "Oh, I just assumed—" My eyes drifted to the rings on her fingers. "These?" she said, holding up her hand. "They're decoys. It's just easier this way. At work, people don't bother a married woman. It spares me the awkwardness of fending off advances and protects me from unwanted gossip. Plus, let's face it, employers tend to favor married employees. They think we're more grounded." "That's clever," I admitted, intrigued. "But what happens when people ask about your husband?" "I keep it simple," Monica said with a shrug. "He's traveling, busy, or something came up. After a while, they stop asking. Works like a charm." "Well, you had me completely convinced," I replied with a grin. Dinner turned out to be wonderful. We talked for hours, and by the end of the night, I surprised myself by sharing parts of my life I usually kept guarded, the struggles, the betrayals, and the hard-won lessons of the past 2 years. "That's awful," Monica said, shaking her head in disbelief. "You didn't deserve any of that." "It's over now," I said with a sigh. "I'm trying to leave it behind and move forward. What choice do I have?" She leaned forward slightly, her expression softening. "You've got a lot going for you, Steve. You're smart, funny, and good-looking. There are plenty of women who jump at the chance to be with you." Her cheeks reddened slightly as she spoke. I laughed, a little self-consciously. "Maybe, but I've been out of the game for so long, I'm not even sure where to start. And honestly, I'm not in a rush." Monica tilted her head with a playful smile. "Well, you asked me out, didn't you?" "I asked you and your husband," I reminded her, chuckling. "Would you have asked if you knew I wasn't married?" she teased. "Probably," I admitted with a sheepish grin. "You're easy to talk to, you're fun, and most importantly, you're nothing like my ex." She burst out laughing. "I think I'll take that as a compliment." The evening ended on a high note, and the next day I left town, not expecting to return for several weeks. Before I left, I told Monica to reach out if she needed anything. For the first time in a while, I felt like I could trust someone outside my small circle. Over the next few months, whenever I was in town, Monica and I spent time together. Our connection grew stronger through phone calls and emails between visits, and gradually, I found myself letting my guard down. Eventually, our relationship deepened into something more intimate, and I began to feel ready for something serious. But then, everything unraveled. One Tuesday evening, after we'd spent time together, Monica kissed me goodnight and said, "Let's plan for a long evening Thursday, just the two of us." "Thursday it is," I said, already reminding myself to grab everything we'd need for a special night. The following evening, with no plans, I decided to explore a restaurant I'd never tried before. After searching for options, I settled on a highly rated Indian spot about 25 minutes away. I found a quiet corner booth, ordered a beer and the sampler platter, and prepared to relax. Just as my food arrived, a familiar laugh made me pause. I looked up, scanning the room, and there she was, Monica. She wasn't alone. Across the table sat a man, and judging by their body language, this wasn't a casual dinner. They leaned in close, laughed, and even held hands. I sat frozen as I watched them kiss, and suddenly, I had no appetite. Finishing my beer in silence, I paid the bill and walked out. Whatever internal conflict she had mentioned clearly wasn't troubling her much. The next day, Monica was back to her usual self, brushing against me and playfully touching my arm at every opportunity. "Everything resolved last night?" I asked evenly. She nodded, her eyes sparkling. "Yep, all handled. Tonight it's just you and me." "I've got an idea for dinner," I said casually. "I found this amazing place last night, quiet, cozy, and the sampler platter is fantastic." Her face went pale. "Oh, what kind of place?" "Indian," I said, locking eyes with her. Her expression faltered, and she forced a laugh. "What a coincidence. I was at an Indian restaurant last night, too. Crazy, right? I even ran into someone I knew. What are the odds?" "Monica," I said, my voice cold. "Steve, I can explain." "Don't bother," I interrupted. "I've dealt with lies before, and I'm not about to go through that again. I got rid of one deceitful woman, and I don't need another." Without another word, I walked away. I cut my trip short and ignored every email she sent over the following weeks. Eventually, she stopped trying. Whatever trust I'd rebuilt had been shattered, leaving me more guarded than ever. 3 months later, life threw me an unexpected surprise. Bob's office was near a busy intersection, and his parking lot was across the street from the building. On a chilly Friday evening, eager to get home, Bob stepped into the crosswalk just as the light turned green. He didn't see the black sedan speeding through the red light. The car struck him on the right side, launching him over the hood and onto the asphalt with a sickening thud. Witnesses later described the scene as unfolding too quickly for anyone to react or warn him. The 2 women closest to the accident couldn't provide much detail about the car. All they could say was that it was a black 4-door sedan with tinted windows, coincidentally, a description that matched my black BMW. The next evening, I was chatting with my neighbor Tom when a police cruiser rolled into my driveway. 2 officers stepped out and approached us. "Mr. Moore, we need to ask you a few questions," the shorter officer said, his tone direct. Of course," I replied. Turning to Tom, I added, "Let's pick up this conversation later." Tom lingered for a moment, casting a wary glance at the officers before retreating back to his house. The taller officer stepped forward, consulting a small notebook. "You own a black 2002 BMW 320i, correct?" "That's right," I replied, puzzled. "What's this about? Parking tickets?" I added with a nervous chuckle, but their blank expressions quickly erased any hint of humor. "Is the vehicle here?" the officer continued. "It's in the garage," I said cautiously. "Mind telling me what's going on?" "We'd like to take a look at it," the shorter officer said, ignoring my question. I led them through the house to the garage, making an effort to appear calm. My BMW, though reliable, showed its age with a few scratches and dents, remnants of years on the road. The officers focused on the front right side of the car, snapping photos and jotting notes. "Can you explain these marks on the bumper?" one asked. "No idea," I said casually. "This car's been with me for 8 years. You can't expect it to be pristine forever." I crossed my arms. "Now that I've answered your questions, maybe you can answer mine. What's this about, and why are you so interested in my car?" "There was a hit and run yesterday involving a black sedan with tinted windows," the officer explained. "Your vehicle matches the description." "So do hundreds of others in this city," I shot back. "Do you have anything more specific, like a license plate or an eyewitness identifying me?" "Witnesses only saw the car," he admitted. "Well, as you can see, there's no fresh damage here," I said, gesturing around. "And I can account for my whereabouts yesterday from morning until evening. Why am I suddenly a suspect?" The taller officer hesitated, his expression unreadable. "Your history with the sufferer and prior threats you've made put you on our radar." The other officer stepped in, his tone more measured. "We appreciate your cooperation. We'll be in touch if we need anything further." "Wait!" I called out as they turned to leave. "Who's the sufferer?" The taller officer paused, but didn't turn around. "A Mr. Robert Kelly," he said flatly. A smile tugged at my lips before I could stop it. "Is he dead?" I asked, unable to hide the curiosity in my voice. "No," the officer replied curtly, "but he's in critical condition." They walked off as I waved, unable to suppress my amusement. Inside, I opened a bottle of wine, ordered a pizza, and enjoyed a quiet evening. I finished the entire bottle and almost all of the pizza, feeling strangely celebratory. The neighborhood buzzed with talk of Bob's accident. Some expressed sympathy, while others muttered that he had it coming. Personally, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. 2 days later, Bob's condition deteriorated, and he passed away. For the funeral, I made sure to look sharp. New suit, fresh haircut, and polished shoes. On my way, I even got my car washed and waxed. As I arrived at the funeral home, conversations outside fell silent, and all eyes turned toward me. Inside, I ignored the guest book and walked purposefully down the aisle. Kathy, seated near the casket with my children, looked horrified when she saw me. Her shock was priceless. She jumped up, trying to intercept me, but I was faster. Reaching the open casket, I leaned over, letting years of anger surface. Without hesitation, I spit directly onto Bob's face. The spit dribbled onto his pristine shirt, leaving a glaring stain. Kathy screamed, her voice breaking into sobs as she hurled insults at me. My smirk widened. 2 down, 1 to go, I said quietly, meeting her furious gaze. Her expression shifted from anger to fear. "I warned you," I added, before turning and walking out, leaving the funeral in stunned silence. Over the next month, the police questioned me twice more. Kathy insisted I was somehow involved in Bob's end of life, but they had no evidence. The case eventually went cold, and the incident faded from people's minds. One evening, I watched as a patrol car pulled into my driveway. "You're late," I said dryly, as 2 officers stepped out and approached the house. "Mr. Moore," one of them began, his tone formal as he slid a photo across the table. "Do you know a David Kint?" "Sure," I replied evenly, glancing at the photo. The officer's gaze sharpened. "How do you know him?" "I hired him to keep an eye on my ex-wife," I said matter-of-factly. The officer raised an eyebrow. "Why would you do that?" "She seems to attract trouble," I explained. "Since my kids live with her, I thought it was best to have someone ensure their safety. Kint mostly watches at night, making sure everything's fine." "Your ex-wife reported feeling followed. She saw Mr. Kint multiple times and called us. When we questioned him, he mentioned you hired him," the officer said, his tone sharp. "Is that illegal?" I asked calmly. "It's not against the law," the officer said, his tone firm. "But it's dangerously close to maltreatment. You could face charges if it continues." "Noted," I replied calmly. "If the department wants to take over protecting my kids, I'll gladly step back. Otherwise, I'll keep making sure they're safe." The officer crossed his arms, his gaze steady. "Why don't you work this out with your ex-wife?" "The last time I tried that, I ended up in jail," I said flatly. The officers eventually let me go, but left me with a cliched warning about keeping an eye on me. They really needed to work on their lines. When I hired David, I didn't care about subtlety. I wanted Kathy to feel his presence, to know she was being watched. The next man I hired was even less inconspicuous. With a leather jacket, scruffy beard, and an aura straight out of a biker gang film, he was impossible to miss. He charged $30 an hour and only worked a few hours every fourth night, but he delivered exactly what I wanted: unease. My goal was simple: to push Kathy to the brink. If she cracked under the pressure, I could use it to secure full custody of my kids. "What do you want from me, Steve?" she screamed into the phone one night, her voice laced with desperation. "Honestly, for you to drop dead," I replied coolly. She hung up without another word. Later that night, I was sitting on my porch with a drink when the inevitable happened. A police cruiser pulled into my driveway and 2 officers stepped out. I greeted them with mock enthusiasm. "Figured you'd show up sooner or later," I said, leaning back in my chair. Kathy had accused me of threatening her, but this time I was prepared. By the time we reached the station, my attorney was already waiting. "My client never threatened Mrs. Kelly," my lawyer stated, his tone even. "He simply expressed a personal opinion about her demise. That's not a threat, it's free speech." The officers weren't convinced. "She feels threatened, especially since your client has hired individuals to follow her. It's creating a hostile situation." "Hiring someone to observe another person isn't illegal," my lawyer countered. "Unless you have hard evidence of wrongdoing, this is a waste of time." The taller officer sighed in frustration. "Mr. Moore, why don't you just move on? People get divorced every day. What happened is unfortunate, but you need to let it go. If she snaps and something happens, we'll know where to look. If she agrees to give up custody of the kids, my client will step back entirely," my lawyer offered. "That's a matter for the courts," the officer replied. With nothing else to say, the meeting ended and we walked out. That Sunday morning, as I enjoyed coffee and the newspaper on my deck, the doorbell rang. It was early and I wasn't expecting visitors. When I opened the door, Kathy's parents were standing there. "Steve, can we have a word?" her father asked. "Sure, come on in," I said, motioning them inside. They were dressed in their Sunday best, likely coming from or heading to church. I offered them coffee, but they politely declined. "We came to talk about Kathy," her father began. "We know she's made mistakes, and what happened to you wasn't fair, but she's still our daughter, and we're worried about her." I nodded, leaning against the counter. "I don't want anything to happen to her either. But let's be clear. She's made her choices, and now she has to live with the consequences. My priority is the kids. They'd be better off with me, especially given her string of bad luck. I don't want them caught in the crossfire if things take a turn." Her parents exchanged uneasy glances. "We'll talk to her," her mother said hesitantly. "But you know how stubborn she is." "The Kathy I married wouldn't have cheated or betrayed me the way she did," I said bluntly. "I don't recognize who she is now. But if you're expecting forgiveness, don't hold your breath. I don't forgive, and I sure as hell don't forget." They left quickly after that, clearly unsettled by my words. I figured my message had landed. On Thursday evening, the confrontation I'd been anticipating finally arrived. Just after sunset, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Kathy standing there. She hadn't called ahead, which made her appearance even more satisfying. Opening the door, I greeted her with a smirk. "Evening, Kathy. Care for a drink? How about hemlock?" "Do you ever stop being an a-hole?" she snapped, pushing past me into the house. I closed the door behind her. "What brings you by? Finally decide to admit you've been wrong all along?" She ignored the jab and sat down stiffly in the living room. "I want to talk about the house," she said flatly. "Our house?" I asked. "You mean the one I've been paying for single-handedly since the divorce?" "I still own half of it," she shot back. "I want it sold. What's it going to take for you to lower the price?" "An act of God," I replied, "unless you're willing to cover the loss and add interest." "Fine," she said, gritting her teeth. "Just get it done. I want you out of this neighborhood and out of my life." "That's never going to happen," I said calmly. "You still hate me that much?" she asked, her voice softening. "More than you could imagine," I replied. "But let's not rewrite history. This isn't about hate, it's about consequences. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." "It wasn't planned," she said, her tone almost pleading. "What happened with Bob wasn't intentional. It just happened." I shook my head, unimpressed. "Save the excuses, Kathy. They're as empty as the promises you made during our marriage." She stared at me for a moment before standing. "You're impossible. And you're predictable," I said, opening the door. "Don't let it hit you on the way out." She couldn't possibly believe I was dumb enough to fall for that line. "Don't insult me, Kathy. Nothing just happens. Unless he forced you at gunpoint, you went along with it willingly. Was he so much better in bed that you decided to burn down our marriage and shatter our family?" Her face tightened, but she didn't flinch. It wasn't about Zex, Steve. It was about the fact that he needed me. He didn't have anyone else, and somewhere along the way, I guess we both started to depend on each other. It just grew from there. Needed you? I snapped, feeling my anger spike. What were you doing? Hosting a charity drive for the emotionally destitute? I needed you. Our kids needed you. Our marriage needed you. But apparently none of that mattered, because some sad stray dog wagged his tail at you. Now he's rotting in the ground, and he's the least needy person I can think of. I let a cold smile creep across my face. I only regret that I wasn't the one driving the car that ended his pitiful existence. God, Steve, do you even hear yourself? She shot back, her voice cracking under the strain of her disgust. You've turned into someone so full of hate, it's disturbing. Do you seriously take pleasure in someone else's end of life? I didn't get here on my own, Kathy, I said bitterly. You and your late boyfriend deserve a lot of credit for shaping me into what I am. Don't give me that crap, she retorted. That's just an excuse, and you know it. Marriages fail every day. 60% of them end in divorce. Do you think every single one of those people turns into the hateful, vengeful mess you've become? I couldn't care less about anyone else's marriage, I snapped. This is about mine. How long, Kathy? How long was I the idiot, the clueless fool, while you two carried on? Does it even matter? She asked with exasperation. It matters to me, I replied firmly. Was it 2 months, 3, 5? She sighed, as though resigning herself to the conversation. About 5 months, she admitted. Not that it changes anything. The first time it happened, I almost told you. I was so upset with myself, I barely knew what to do. But you didn't, I said coldly. And clearly you weren't that upset because it happened again and again. How many times, Kathy? How many times did you screw him in the bed we shared? Never! She snapped, her voice tinged with indignation. I would never disrespect you like that. Oh, but doing it everywhere else was just fine? I shot back. Did you know some of our friends knew? They saw what was happening, but none of them had the guts to tell me. I learned the hard way that you can't trust anyone, least of all you. She took a deep breath as if trying to steady herself. Where do we go from here, Steve? The house is all that's left tying us together. What about the kids? I asked, my voice rising. I'm not giving them up, she said firmly. And there's nothing you can say to make me change my mind. Her defiance only made my mind race faster. I took a moment to steady myself, my tone growing calm but sharp. I'm not here to convince you, Kathy. You got custody because of what you pushed me to do. If I hadn't lost my temper and gone after Bob and his car, things could have been different. I leaned closer, lowering my voice. Bob got exactly what was coming to him, and now it's just you and me. Her eyes widened, her composure faltering. Steve, are you threatening me? Threaten you? Never, I said with mock sincerity. I'd never deprive my kids of their mother. But life's unpredictable, Kathy. Heart attacks, accidents, even a bolt of lightning. You just never know what might happen. I just hope, for their sake, you've got your affairs in order. Her face drained of color, and I knew the line had landed. I'd stolen it from a movie once, but the chill it left in the air was all real. I'm done here, she said, standing abruptly. For what it's worth, we had 12 good years. I'm sorry it ended like this. She leaned forward, as if to kiss me on the cheek. I stepped back, shoving her away more forcefully than I intended, and she stumbled slightly. Don't you ever try to touch me again, I growled. Her eyes widened, shock written across her face. I'm sorry, I just thought... You thought what? I interrupted. That we'd be friends? That I'd forgive you? You make me sick. She mumbled a soft, sorry, but I cut her off. Don't be, I said coldly. Because I'm not. She turned and walked out, heading down the driveway. As she reached the sidewalk, I called after her. By the way, Kathy, you know that look you just gave me? Bob had the exact same look on his face just before that car hit him. Too bad I didn't have a camera. She broke into a run, and I closed the door with a satisfied smirk. The truth was, I had started the fire at Bob's house. 2 Gatorade bottles of gasoline and a cigarette were all it took. I'd made sure the place was empty before I lit it up, but it didn't spread as fast as I'd hoped. Still, I was in and out in under 5 minutes, tossing the bottles into a neighbor's recycling bin before anyone noticed I was gone. As for Bob's end of life, that wasn't my doing. Dumb luck took care of him. Wrong place, wrong time. If he'd only looked both ways like his mother probably taught him, he'd still be alive. Kathy and her family still think I had something to do with it. Part of me wishes I had, but I wasn't about to risk going back to prison. Instead, I'd let Kathy's paranoia do the work for me. With every doubt I planted, every hint I dropped, she edged closer to a breakdown. And when she finally cracked, I'd be ready to take custody of my kids. Meanwhile, I wasn't going anywhere. I liked my house, I liked my life, and most of all, I liked being just up the street from my kids. Who knows? Maybe one day, they'd choose to live with me full-time. The silver lining in all this mess? I'd met someone new. Ellen worked for the Department of Corrections, and I'd met her during my probation check-ins. Tough, no nonsense, and unflinching, she didn't take crap from anyone. We hit it off, but she made it clear there'd be no dating until my probation ended. When it finally did, we went out, and I told her about my baggage. She didn't flinch, countering with stories of the lies she'd heard from convicts over the years. Together, we're figuring things out, one step at a time. "You need to let go, Steve," she told me one night. "If you don't, you'll never move forward. And if you mess up and land back in jail, I'll personally make your life hell." She said it with a grin, but I didn't doubt her for a second. With Ellen, I'm learning to trust again. She keeps me grounded, and for the first time in years, I feel like I'm ready to move on, maybe even love again.
My world shattered, I discovered shocking proof of my wife brazenly cheating on me in my own car. My name is Ron, and I've been happily married to Lily for 15 years. Our family is a huge source of happiness for me, and I can really feel how much my wife loves me. Our marriage has grown in a way that makes me very happy. We're parents to 2 fantastic daughters in their early teens. Both of us have steady jobs. I work at a security company, and Lily is a voice translator at a film studio. We're healthy and live in a beautiful house in a nice area of the city. Life is great, and I don't think it could be any better. After our younger daughter was born, Lily gained some weight. However, her beautiful blue eyes, which stand out more behind her glasses. She doesn't use contact lenses because they bother her eyes when she reads or does paperwork, make her even more attractive. I'm deeply in love with Lily, and I know she loves me just as much. We have 2 amazing daughters, a comfortable house, and we don't worry about money. Everything was perfect in my life. But then, something bad happened after 15 years of marriage that could change everything and ruin my once perfect and happy life. Lately, Lily began a routine of hanging out with her women colleagues at various bars every other Friday. They rotate among 3 or 4 places they like. She goes out these Fridays to chat and relax after work, as she often tells me. I'm okay with her going out by herself. I get home by 4:30 every day to look after our daughters. When she's out with her colleagues on those nights, I make dinner for the girls and help them with homework, which I really enjoy. She typically gets back by 8, and then we spend the whole weekend together doing fun family activities and eating out with our daughters on Saturday night. But in recent months, she's been getting home later, around 10, on these girls' nights, and I've noticed she's had a few drinks. I didn't bring it up because she's still the same affectionate wife she's always been. Every time she returns from those nights out, she has this special smile that makes me want to hug her. I understand that her time with friends is her way to unwind and forget about a tough work week. I convinced myself it was just harmless fun with her colleagues, even if she started coming home later than before. Then, a few weeks ago, on a Monday morning, I received an email from someone who signed it as a friend. I almost deleted the message without reading it, but I decided to give it a second thought. The email said they were at the Black Crow last Friday and saw Lily enjoying herself with a group, especially dancing with a man from her group. They attached a picture taken with their cell phone, asking me to examine it closely. This email had already planted doubts in my mind, and I feared what I might find out. Despite knowing Lily danced during these outings, the email mentioned male co-workers, something she never told me. I always thought it was only her female friends. Even though she could have been dancing with someone already at the Black Crow, not part of their group, a lump formed in my throat, and I started feeling uneasy about the whole situation. Despite my reservations, I opened the attachment. The moment the picture appeared, I noticed it wasn't perfectly centered, suggesting the photographer was cautious to avoid being seen. I observed my wife's co-workers, both male and female, sitting at a long table in the background. The picture was somewhat blurry, but I could still make out my wife on the right side of the dance floor. She wore her beige blouse with red flowers and green leaves along with matching brown slacks, the same outfit from her last girls' night out. So I deduced the picture was taken the previous Friday when she arrived home later than usual at 10:30. Giving me a hug and her usual smile. In the photo, she was on the dance floor with a tall, young man, embracing tightly with both arms around his neck. To say I was shocked would be an understatement. I couldn't recall ever dancing like that with Lily or any other girl in public. The man's lower body pressed tightly against her, and it seemed she could feel his hardness rubbing against her. He had to be aroused, as it's impossible not to be in that situation. Strangely, Lily didn't seem bothered. On the contrary, she appeared happy, pushing herself against him as they locked eyes. My wife, the mother of my daughters, was in the arms of a stranger, behaving provocatively in public. I couldn't believe what I saw. She wouldn't dance with me like that in public. Why was she letting a stranger act this way? Or was he truly a stranger? Doubt firmly took hold in my mind and grew fast beyond my control. Various scenarios of my wife with other men played out, making me feel sick. I rushed to the bathroom where I threw up my breakfast. Lily, my wife, was acting inappropriately in public. Was she having an affair? How could she do this to me and our 2 daughters? Many questions flooded my mind. Who was that man? Did they work together? How long had this been happening? Why was she involved with him? Update: for the next 30 minutes, I stayed in my office bathroom trying to clear my thoughts. Gradually, new emotions started emerging: disappointment, sadness, and anger, followed by a strong desire for revenge. A range of intense emotions took over me, creating a whirlwind of reactions. I felt the urge to kick Lily, to hug her and ask her to stop, or even to consider divorcing her. Then, a moment later, I'd think of forgiving her and giving her another chance. As I sat on the toilet, I thought I was losing my mind. Eventually, I regained control, deciding to do nothing but wait and watch Lily before taking any action. Making emotionally influenced decisions without knowing the full truth wouldn't make sense. I needed to wait and not tell her about what I already knew. Simultaneously, I was determined to get to the bottom of it all. One way or another, I had to get solid proof of what was going on. Was she cheating on me, or was she just having exaggerated fun? However, I already knew she had lied by omitting the whole truth about her evenings out with the girls. Her movie studio was only a couple of blocks away from my workplace. Since I was often on the road for work, checking on Lily was easy. The next day at 11:30, I parked at the end of her workplace's parking lot, feeling relatively safe with tinted windows. I watched the exit door until 1, but she never came out. I repeated this for the rest of the week, and on Friday at 12:15, I saw Lily and 3 others, a woman and 2 men, get into a black BMW. Lily sat in front, next to the driver, and they drove away. Naturally, I followed them. They drove downtown, entered the parking lot of a fancy restaurant, and I observed them laughing as they went inside. Parked in front of the restaurant, I stayed in my car until they came out at 2. Lily walked next to the tall, light-haired man, the driver, the same man she had been dancing with in the photo I already had. She seemed very cheerful and excited, touching his arms as they talked. This, more than anything else, angered me. They drove back to her workplace and all went inside. So far, Lily hadn't done anything wrong except for not mentioning to me that she sometimes went out to eat with both male and female co-workers. More importantly, the 4 of them at lunch acted as if they were 2 couples, not friends or co-workers. And that bothered me the most. That Friday, Lily didn't go out with the girls after work and got home at 5:15, cheerful and smiling as usual. It took a lot of willpower to control myself and not bombard her with questions. However, I asked her once, while quietly sitting in front of the television after supper, if she had a good day at work, and then I inquired about her lunch. For a few seconds, I noticed she didn't know exactly what to say, but soon enough, she told me she ate the tuna sandwich she had prepared before leaving for work in the morning. Calling her a liar and maybe a cheater, I told myself. Lily was looking at me with those big blue eyes that I love so much as she told that blatant lie. Although my anger was building, I still felt an urge to reach out and hug her. Of course, being in love with someone does that. I knew I had to control myself or risk doing something I might regret afterward. Instead of asking her more questions, I decided to change the subject and talk about my day at work, trying to act as I usually did. That weekend, Lily probably didn't realize we were facing a significant issue. Later that night, we were close twice, and she behaved like the affectionate wife she always had been. On Saturday, we took our daughters to the zoo, had a great family time, and for a brief moment, I forgot about the events of the past week. I didn't bother checking on her at noon for the rest of the week because I intended to follow her on Friday evening after work. On that Friday, when my 2 daughters arrived home at 4:15, I was already there waiting for them. After ordering pizza, I explained that I had to go to the office and would be home later in the evening. They were old enough to take care of themselves, and it didn't bother me to leave them alone in the house as long as they locked the door. I knew they would be in their room by the time I returned. At exactly 5, I got into my car and drove to Lily's workplace. I observed her getting into her car, and as she left the parking lot, she turned away from our home, heading to a pub for her evening out with the girls. I had no trouble following her, as there was a convoy of 6 cars between my SUV and her Toyota, all driving in the same direction towards a pub, watering hole, or a dance hall, whatever you want to call it. 10 minutes later, I saw Lily's Toyota and the other 6 cars entering the parking lot next to a combination bar restaurant called the Glass Shoe. I stayed in my car, parked at the other end. When everyone was inside, I got out and walked around the place to learn more about where she was going. The pub was relatively distant from other buildings, surrounded by parking spaces. 2 sides bordered streets, and the other 2 were defined by a well-trimmed 5ft high cedar hedge, in front of which were parking spaces. I noticed the black BMW from the convoy, which Lily had gotten into for the restaurant the previous Friday. It was now parked separately in front of the cedar hedge, away from the other cars. I observed separate sets of doors, one for the restaurant and another for the bar. There were fire doors at the back for both, but those were for emergencies only. Another entrance on the other side, where most cars were parked, also led to the bar. However, Lily's group had entered through the door for the restaurant part of the building. I returned to my car and began changing into clothes I had brought for the occasion. I wore a baseball cap and a black windbreaker. Then I added a pair of glasses to my disguise. To change my facial features somewhat, I inserted a protective denture into my mouth, similar to those worn by boxers. I knew I would have a hard time talking and drinking with this, but I didn't care since it was not my intention to get into a discussion or get drunk. Looking in the rear-view mirror, I knew that no one would recognize me. I waited another hour in my car before entering the bar. The group, including my wife, was seated together near the dance floor, drinking and having fun. Seeing Lily sitting close to the same guy she had gone to eat with the previous Friday saddened and disappointed me. I suspected that something might be going on between them. I picked a table at the back, far from them, to quietly observe. The section where I sat was dimmer. There were a couple of lonely souls like me drowning their sorrows. I knew no one would pay attention to me there. Soon the music started, and people moved to the dance floor. I noticed Lily dancing with the guy who sat next to her. The other 3 guys at their table had weird smiles, watching them dance. It was clear Lily and that guy were a couple, catching everyone's attention. After a couple of hours, only Lily, another girl, and 2 men remained. The rest had left. Both couples were on the dance floor, and my wife had her arms around the guy. It was evident they were lovers. He had his hands on Lily's waist, and they barely moved on the dance floor, just standing and rubbing against each other. Then I saw him kiss her and say something in her ear. I watched her nod, and they left the building holding hands. I followed them. It was already quite dark outside. I saw them walk hand in hand to his car, parked in the last row of the parking lot near the cedar hedge. He knew they wouldn't be bothered there, with no other cars nearby and the hedge at the back. What were they planning? How far would Lily let it go? I needed to find out. Carefully, I walked to the other end of the parking lot and then toward the cedar hedge. Staying close to the 5ft high hedge, I walked toward their car, hiding behind parked cars. Soon, I stood by the back of his BMW. At first, I saw no one inside due to the darkness. As I moved closer, attempting to look inside, the deeply tinted windows revealed nothing, but I heard muffled voices. Feeling desperate, I debated whether to intervene or wait to catch Lily in the act. After a brief moment, the decision was no longer mine. When I noticed the car shaking rhythmically, the guy was fooling around with my wife. I couldn't contain my rage. I yanked the door open, flooding the car with light, revealing my wife, Lily, lying on her back with her lover on top of her, caught red-handed. Having removed my disguise, Lily's eyes met mine, her expression shifting from bliss to shock in seconds. She mumbled an apology, urging me not to act rashly. Then, with urgency, she declared it meant nothing and asked me to wait for her, claiming she was going home. Slamming the door shut, I walked away, heading straight to my car. By the time I left the parking lot, Lily was already halfway to me, shouting for me to wait. Update: Lily arrived home less than 5 minutes after I did, appearing disheveled with messy hair and crumpled clothes. Tearfully, she approached me. She expressed deep remorse, apologizing for hurting me and breaking our marriage vows. Lily claimed that had she known I was being betrayed, she could have engaged in similar indiscretions. Despite her pleas, I felt an unexpected surge of anger. Her apologies continued as she insisted that her actions meant nothing to her, professing love for me and emphasizing the importance of our family. Overwhelmed, she cried, hiding her face and eventually sitting on the couch due to shaky legs. Dismissing her apologies, I asserted that what she did to our marriage was unforgivable and demanded to know the identity of the other person and the duration of their affair. I felt a sense of relief as she moved to the couch, removing her from my immediate presence. The urge to physically react to her betrayal lingered. She revealed the man's identity, someone from her workplace, and pleaded for understanding, claiming the affair should never have occurred. Lily justified her actions by pointing to supposed deception during girls' nights over the past 2 years, but insisted it didn't diminish her love for me. Expressing my inability to live with the public nature of her affair, I highlighted the impact on our reputation among co-workers and at social events. Lily begged for forgiveness, vowing that the betrayal would not recur and emphasizing the importance of salvaging our marriage and family. While she continued to speak, I stood up, turning away from her. I decided to leave to give myself time to think. I confronted her about destroying our marriage through her initial infidelity. A sudden cry and loud moan caught my attention, prompting me to look back at Lily on the floor, crying in desperation. Despite the overwhelming urge to comfort her, the anger and sense of betrayal made it clear I couldn't trust myself to stay near her. I silently left the house, spending the night in a hotel room without sleep. The next morning, I called my secretary and informed her I wouldn't be going to work for the day. I stayed in my room until noon. After grabbing a quick bite at the hotel restaurant, I passed by my house on the way to the office. There was a green Toyota in the driveway, which I recognized as Francine's, Lily's sister. At least I thought my daughters had their aunt's company, along with that of my cheating wife, providing a bit of comfort. What I didn't know then was that Lily was in the hospital. After leaving the house the previous evening and explaining the situation to her sister on the phone, Lily had a breakdown. It was only once I reached my office that I got the news. Francine, Lily's sister, called me, and we had a lengthy conversation. She explained that Lily was emotionally distressed and crying constantly. Less than an hour after I left the house the previous evening, my eldest daughter called Francine, saying Lily was delirious and I was not home. Francine then talked to her sister and promptly called an ambulance when she realized Lily's condition. Francine let me know she was still at my house, taking care of my 2 daughters for a few days. She strongly suggested that I visit my wife at Santa Mary's hospital in town. After the call ended, I was beyond shocked. Had I been selfish the previous evening? Did I abandon my family when they needed me the most? Maybe. But one thing was clear. If I stayed in the house with her that evening, there was a chance, however small, that I might have become violent due to what she had done. Yes, she wrecked our marriage, but until yesterday, I didn't see myself as someone who avoided problems. Was that exactly what I had done? Lily and I faced a significant problem, undoubtedly. But was that reason enough for me to abandon my family when they needed me? I felt terrible sitting behind my desk. I started crying, questioning if there could have been another way, a better way, with forgiveness and maybe reconciliation, a slim possibility. Of course, this mess was Lily's doing. She was entirely responsible for giving another man what should have been mine alone. However, breaking my marriage would hurt my 2 daughters too much. There had to be another solution. That's when I thought of forgiveness, with retribution. Once I recovered from the shock of learning about Lily's hospitalization, I got in my car and drove to the hospital. I had no idea what I would say to her, but one thing was certain. I was going to face the situation and find out exactly what she had done. Now I find myself lying in a hospital bed. A thought crosses my mind, recalling something my mother used to say: cheaters always face consequences, one way or another. Ron and I tied the knot when I was 20, and we were genuinely happy. We had 2 amazing daughters, a lovely home, a great neighborhood, and financial stability. More importantly, I loved my husband, and I knew he loved me back. When my youngest daughter turned 6, I landed a job at a film studio near Ron's workplace. With the fall of the Iron Curtain and the gradual democratization of communism, there was a high demand for U.S. films in Ukraine. Being fluent in Ukrainian and having acting experience from university, I secured a position as a female voice translator for English films, translating them into the Ukrainian language. It was a fantastic job with good pay, and I excelled at it. After 5 years, a new voice translator named Victor Dino joined us. He was a tall, attractive man in his late 20s with dark blonde hair. Most girls at the studio had a crush on him, but he seemed oblivious to the attention. Vic, born in the U.S. with Ukrainian-speaking grandparents, was perfectly bilingual. We started working together often, and a deep friendship developed between us. That's when my troubles began. Without realizing it, I found myself thinking I was in love with him. Initially, he treated me like the other girls, discussing work matters, and we worked well together. Eventually, he started joining us on alternate Fridays, and our friendship grew into something deeper. We became more than just colleagues. We became good friends. I confided in him about my life, sharing things I had never told my husband, especially when Vic began joining us at the pubs. My first mistake was not telling Ron that our girls' night out was now mixed. I enjoyed Vic's company and didn't want to share his attention with my husband on those nights. Our friendship turned into something deeper, and we found ourselves dancing together frequently. I didn't realize how far things had gone until one evening, while dancing to a slow song, he kissed me passionately. It wasn't a friendly or family kiss. I was shocked. That's how it all started. The following Friday, he found an excuse to take me out of the pub, and we engaged in intimate moments in his car. From there, our passion escalated, and soon we were engaging in more explicit activities in the backseat of his car. Despite feeling guilty when I got home, I made sure to show Ron the love he deserved. However, I failed to realize that Ron, as my husband, deserved my complete love, and I shouldn't have given any of it to Vic. Working with Vic every day made it impossible to keep away from him. Gradually, even at work, we developed the habit of hugging and kissing when no one was around. From my perspective, this behavior with Vic didn't diminish my love for Ron. I still would have given my life for him, and I had no intention of hurting him with my affair with Vic. I was wrong. Making love with Vic wasn't better than making love with my husband. By the time Ron found out about my affair with Vic, we had been lovers for 4 months. While I didn't love Vic like I loved my husband, the physical aspect was fantastic. The freedom I felt with Vic, not having to restrain myself, made all the difference. When making love with my husband, I had to hold back to avoid him thinking less of me. With Vic, I had no such restrictions, since I didn't care what he thought about me. This was the main reason I did things with Vic that I had never done with my husband. I think Vic and I were really thoughtless and careless in how we behaved in front of our colleagues. Vic didn't care much since he wasn't married. But because of our public behavior, it was only a matter of time before my husband found out about me and Vic from a jealous coworker. We should have been more discreet. Even if Ron never found out about my affair, I now understand it would still have been terribly wrong. The evening Ron caught us was the worst moment of my life. He yelled at me to go to hell and take my lover with me. Just before he turned to leave the car, I knew my marriage was in deep trouble. I even stepped on Vic in my rush to leave his car and catch up with my husband, but I was too late. By the time I was halfway to his car, he was speeding away, leaving me standing there in the middle of the parking lot. Until then, I considered my love for Ron like a fire burning only for him, and I knew he felt the same about me. Then one day, when Vic entered my life and kissed me for the first time, it was like a spark from that fire ignited another fire burning for Vic. These emotions for Vic didn't take anything away from the love I felt for my husband. I convinced myself it was like when my youngest daughter was born. Loving her with all my heart didn't reduce the love I still had for my eldest daughter. It's incredible, the things we tell ourselves to justify our basest urges. Children don't expect a parent to love only them, and we never vow to our children to forsake all others. Yes, the love of a parent for a child is far different from the love one should have for their spouse. But I made sure those thoughts never reached my consciousness while I played games with Vic. I know my husband doesn't see it the same way I did then, and I don't blame him. I understand that if the roles were reversed and he had another woman in his life, I would be devastated. Human thoughts and emotions are mysterious, and sometimes we shouldn't try to reason them. So now, I'm here in a hospital bed. Each time I wake from my dreamless rest, I start thinking about the events of the last few months. I cry and feel sorry for myself. Then the nurse injects me again with something, and I sleep once more. A wonderful sleep that allows me to forget everything. I wish I could never wake up again and find peace with myself. But each time, just before I pass out, I see a picture of Ron and me on our wedding day. Oh God, help me, my children, my husband. I can't leave them. I must fight the urge to hide on the other side. Life is a never-ending combat. My father once told me, if you stop fighting, then you had no right to be living in the first place. I am alive. Ron and my daughters are alive. And I will live also. After all, they are the loves of my life. Yes, I will, for my husband and my family. To me, Vic is just dirt now. He had absolutely no right to be in my life in the first place. If Ron allows me, I will be, once again and for the rest of my life, the faithful wife I used to be. When I wake up, how long in the future, I don't know. But I will come back into my family's world. Of that, I am certain. When I do, the first thing I hope to see is my husband standing there in front of me, so that I can start the difficult task of making it up to him. I don't know how many days I have to stay here in the hospital bed, but I beg everyone to pray for Ron and our daughters.
My spouse and I are employed at the same marketing firm. Lucy holds the title of customer ambassador, though the specifics of her role remain elusive. I'm Mark, leading the IT team. Things were going smoothly. We were both employed, and Happy had just finished renovating our rundown house. We have 2 lovely children, Emma, 13, and Daniel, 11. We live near our families and have close friendships. Both over 30, we complement each other well, though she surpasses me in looks, standing at 1.75 meters with long blonde hair and captivating blue eyes. Lucy claims her family resides in Sweden, and she embodies a slim Scandinavian appearance. Energetic and vibrant, She never seems to stand still. I stand at 7.5 centimeters tall with sandy hair and prefer endurance sports like cycling and running, resulting in a slim, physically fit physique, albeit not overtly athletic. I was taken aback when invited to a long weekend on a private island owned by one of our firm's clients. Our CEO, Jack Edwards, explained that he, along with his wife Margaret, several directors, and their partners would attend. Lucy was also invited due to her role as the client's main contact. It seemed I was there for number crunching, but hey, don't question a good opportunity. Jack emphasized the client's wealth and potential significance to our firm, mentioning an early Friday departure and Monday return on a private charter with all expenses covered. Lucy seemed well informed, having worked closely with the client for months and eagerly anticipating the free weekend. Although I inquired about the plans, she didn't have much information, so I asked about the client. Lucy explained that his name was William Fellows, in his mid-40s, exuding confidence and inheriting a family fortune. She seemed somewhat fascinated, describing him as assertive and reserved. Great, I thought to myself. He sounds like an arrogant idiot. But I decided to keep that observation to myself until the weekend. 2 weeks later, on a Friday morning, we found ourselves aboard a private charter plane. I must admit I was impressed. If the island belonged to him, it must be quite luxurious. I wasn't sure what to expect, but it appeared vast, perhaps 5 miles long and a couple of miles wide. As we approached for landing, it resembled a 5-star resort, with main buildings positioned behind a crescent-shaped white sandy beach. Lucy was thrilled, and the others shared her excitement. After settling into our rooms, we joined our host for lunch on the veranda overlooking the bay. Though I was initially wary, William seemed affable, and Lucy even downplayed his appearance, comparing him to George Clooney. He thanked us for coming and encouraged us to relax. We conversed with other couples from our firm and met a striking brunette named Charlotte, whom I assumed was William's companion for the weekend. Apart from the waitstaff, there was a man who appeared to be a security guard, lingering in the background. I wondered what threats William faced, requiring protection even on a secluded island. William greeted Lucy warmly, and they seemed at ease in each other's company. She, along with the others, appeared to heed his words, likely due to his generosity as a host and his importance as our firm's most valuable client. We had an excellent afternoon snorkeling, kayaking, and simply lounging around in the bay. Refreshments and food were readily available. Later, we all gathered for dinner with the group, enjoying a laid-back and amiable atmosphere as we engaged in conversations in small groups. Charlotte approached us, introducing herself warmly and sharing anecdotes about her upbringing in England. Despite giving the impression of coming from a well-off family, she seemed genuinely pleasant. I pondered whether she was a model or perhaps didn't have a need to work. To my surprise, she displayed flirtatious behavior toward me, even in Lucy's presence. I skillfully evaded her advances, attributing it to her overly friendly nature. With no childcare responsibilities and the serene setting, it was an ideal setup for a romantic evening. Lucy was especially affectionate, and our lovemaking was passionate. She professed her love for me repeatedly, making it one of the most memorable nights in a while. Perhaps there was merit to the notion of a love island after all. I hoped for a repeat the following morning, but Lucy promptly got ready for breakfast, prompting me to finally get out of bed and join her. As she conversed with Jack and William, I wondered if work matters were on their minds, given their slightly tense demeanor. Maybe William was exploiting the weekend to discuss work-related issues. Approaching them, the conversation appeared to falter briefly, and after a quick snack, we and the others continued to enjoy another delightful day by the pool. On Saturday, we ventured out for dinner, and I couldn't help but notice Lucy's enhanced attire. She looked stunning in a red satin evening dress and high heels. Following dinner, William requested a few minutes of our time. We agreed and followed him into the office, accompanied by a security guard. William took a seat in a plush leather chair while I settled onto the sofa opposite Lucy, observing her slight distance from me. After a prolonged pause, William mentioned that he had a proposition for Mark, stating it was of a personal nature. Mark responded affirmatively, maintaining composure despite feeling completely astonished. William elaborated, expressing his enjoyment of working with Lucy and the bond they had developed over the past few months. He hinted at a proposal, expressing his desire to spend the remainder of the weekend with Lucy. He offered compensation for her time away from me, proposing to transfer $100,000 into our joint account. I chuckled, assuming it was a jest, and couldn't resist making a quip about his generosity compared to a famous movie offer. However, the room fell silent, with no one joining in the laughter. William continued, "Just like in any other business, I'm open to negotiating the price to get what I desire. Plus, Charlotte will be in a tough spot, and I'd appreciate it if you'd agree to entertain her. I glanced at Lucy, anticipating a smile, but instead she looked concerned. This isn't a joke, Mark, she said firmly. William invited me to join him, and I think we should seriously consider this offer. I felt the urge to lash out, but before I could react, the guard was already near. I was taken aback by how swiftly he moved. William pressed on, saying, I assure you, your wife fully supports this idea. What damage could come from it? We'll all have a great time, and you'll earn a substantial sum of money. Turning to Lucy, I remarked, perhaps the difference in price is because Demi Moore didn't settle for that amount. Lucy winced at my comment, but wisely chose to remain silent. My mind raced as I struggled to think clearly, my breathing growing labored. I glanced at the guard, whose demeanor had shifted entirely. He appeared wary, focusing intently on my movements, and with good reason, given my strong desire to strike William. What's your name? I asked, my voice strained. Ex-military, judging by your demeanor. You must deal with this sort of thing often. Shane, sir, he replied calmly. I can't comment on this matter, and if you were to attack your boss, I reckon I could handle you. Shane flashed a smile. Perhaps just to prevent you from doing so, sir. Turning back to William, I retorted, It's fortunate you brought him along. Otherwise, I might have knocked you senseless. William remained unfazed. Let's not rush, Mark. Much depends on this. Lucy interjected, urging me to consider. Think about it, Mark. Just a few days, and money could change our lives forever. I was devastated. It was evident that Lucy was on board and even instigated this plan. Tell me, dear, I pressed, did the offer of money sway you to agree to this? With no response from Lucy, I continued. I suspect Charlotte was offered as an added incentive. Who is she? A fancy woman? William responded, Charlotte is a close personal friend of mine. In addition to her wealth, she's an elite escort who only takes contracts that pique her interest. Rest assured, you'll have an extraordinary experience with her. Lucy winced again, but offered no defense. Well, William, I retorted, you can take your money and shove it up your perfumed rear end. At that moment, Lucy spoke up, revealing her true intentions. She explained to me that it was her decision, and emphasized that it was merely about physical lovemaking. She mentioned that both she and William were curious about exploring it with others, assuring me that their connection was limited to mutual liking and wouldn't diminish our love for each other. Lucy expressed confidence that both Charlotte and I would enjoy the experience. Stunned by her words, I gradually understood the gravity of the situation. I expressed to my dear wife that my desire for exclusivity was profound and meant more than she might realize. I accused her of betrayal and conspiracy behind my back, declaring that I could never trust her again if she was willing to engage in such behavior once. Lucy quickly responded, claiming that I was overreacting. She asserted that she had informed me about her intentions and insisted on her honesty. She mentioned that the affair would occur, but assured me of her return, promising full devotion afterward. Lucy appealed to my love for her, urging me to permit her this one indulgence. She pointed out potential benefits such as financial gain, vacations, and family experiences. Lucy warned against using our children as an excuse and rejected the idea that money motivated her, accusing me of harboring a desire for the affair. She concluded by suggesting that my honesty would only matter if we reached agreements together, implying that I was aligned with William, whom she disparaged as an arrogant idiot. Lucy continued, stating that she believed the mention of money and Charlotte was only because she hadn't expected me to agree. She admitted that she still didn't agree, even with the offer of money. She confessed that she wanted to experience something different and was drawn to William, but she believed it shouldn't injure our relationship. I expressed my reluctance to change and questioned whether she believed this course of action was superior. I inquired if she had already made her decision, even going as far as dressing for the occasion. She warned me not to resist, indicating that I wouldn't appreciate the consequences. Confused, I asked for clarification on what she meant. She replied, suggesting that I wouldn't benefit from fighting against her wishes or seeking a divorce, as it would result in losing everything. She warned me that my home, children, and even my job would be endangered if I resisted, implying that accepting the situation would make everything easier. She mentioned seeing me the next day and assured me of her love and exclusivity. Feeling suffocated, I knew I had to leave before losing control. Struggling to breathe, I stood up and made my way to the door. Despite Lucy calling my name, I continued moving. In the hallway, Charlotte approached and embraced me, offering reassurance. I turned to her, acknowledging her presence. "Who are you, a damn consolation prize?" She walked away confidently. I continued walking and eventually reached outside, but I didn't feel well. I heard footsteps behind me and was disappointed to see it was Shane, not Lucy. "Listen, Shane, you just need to leave me alone." "I'd love to, but I need to ensure you don't do anything rash. Do you have any thoughts?" "Because I'm out of ideas." "Mark, you don't look too good. Just sit against the wall, pull your knees up, and focus on taking long, slow breaths." Feeling weak, I lacked the strength to argue. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only a few minutes before I calmed down. I noticed Shane sitting beside me. "Thanks. I might have had an anxiety or panic attack. You looked pretty pale, but now you seem better." "So, Shane, any ideas on how to get out of this mess?" Shane replied, "Honestly, you can't leave the island today. There are no boats, and the plane and pilot left for another charter. You could try radioing for help, but a cheating wife isn't exactly an emergency." "I'm relieved you see her as unfaithful. She doesn't seem to grasp it, and I'm starting to doubt myself. What should I do? I can't even confront him now because of you." "Yes, sorry about that. I'd step aside, but it'd ruin my career." After a pause, Shane suggested, "Think about your next move and come up with a plan. Whatever you decide can wait until Monday. It's like in the Army. Strategize. Keep quiet about your intentions." The problem is I'm clueless about what to do. They seem to have everything figured out, and I'll just have to endure tomorrow and Monday while you babysit me. After a pause, Shane continued, "There's a cargo ship arriving early Monday. You could hitch a ride if you want to avoid the plane. With everyone else leaving, they can't stop you. No one wants to be accused of kidnapping. I can even accompany you. This deal is losing its appeal. I don't like being on the wrong side, even if it's well-paying." "Okay, that's helpful. I just need to get through tomorrow. How about we go hiking around the island tomorrow morning to distract you, and think about Charlotte. She seems nice, and you've got nothing to lose. If you don't want to go back, you can crash in one of the booths tonight." "No, I think our room is empty. I'll head back there. Maybe she'll change her mind." Of course she didn't. Surprisingly, I fell asleep, probably from exhaustion. The next morning, I changed into my workout clothes and hurried downstairs, hoping to avoid everyone and go on my hike with Shane. Unfortunately, the dining room fell silent as soon as I entered. I quickly grabbed some fruit and heard murmurs of reassurance that everything would be fine. Then CFO John Cousins approached with his wife. "Look, Mark, we've all been through this. Just go with it. It's not personal. He dallies with other wives, then moves on, and he's very generous." When he uttered those words, I noticed his wife's neck flush red. In that moment, Lucy and William emerged. She appeared utterly pleased with herself, radiant, I'd say, until she caught sight of me. Her smile faded. She released that idiot's hand and approached me, intending to kiss or hug. I held her at arm's length and surveyed the room. God, I thought, what a damn idiot. Everyone knew what would happen before the weekend even started. What an absolute fool I was. I stepped out. Lucy implored, "Please stay, Mark. Let's chat with the group and have another good day together." Scanning the room again, I found all eyes fixed on me, some anticipating, others amused by the scene. "No, he paid for you and can keep you. But before I go, I need to address the group. I believe this weekend has been planned for some time, and you all have been in on it, so it's only fair that you hear me out." All members of the group exchanged shocked looks, nervously glancing at each other. "Jack and Margaret, I wouldn't have come this weekend if it weren't for you. I never imagined you'd be involved in something so vile. You know and condone what he does, like some sick voyeur fan club. I hope you enjoyed keeping me in the dark." I noticed their awkward movements. This clearly wasn't part of their plan. I thought we were friends, and their efforts to make me feel at home so they could orchestrate everything was a nice touch. And Bill, you're wrong. This is deeply personal. So thanks for your role in wrecking my marriage. The fact that they're willing to leverage my children is frankly disgusting. I won't let anyone threaten my kids." Lucy interjected, "You're overreacting. It was just closeness, a one-time adventure. I told you I love—" I interrupted her, commenting on what I perceived as the initial phase of her defense strategy. I mentioned that I was aware she had planned my reaction, referring to her as Captain Ducker, and expressed curiosity about her intentions. I outlined Phase A as remaining in the current situation and being compelled to accept what had happened while trying to normalize everything. I mentioned the belief that I shouldn't overreact, be rude, or act childish, and acknowledge the need for personal growth, attributing any resistance to my ego. Despite knowing it wouldn't succeed, I described this as part of the process to soften my stance. Moving on to Phase B, I proposed that after the weekend I would take charge. I suggested increasing physical lovemaking, perhaps trying something new, and leveraging our connection to improve our relationship. I hinted that she may have discussed seducing me, and affectionately urged her not to let my feelings of loss linger for too long. I described Lucy's nervous glance at William, indicating that my comment had affected her deeply. She mentioned the money he had offered and suggested using my earnings from prostitution to take the children to Disneyland, causing discomfort among some present. She outlined a potential Phase B if our conflict persisted, referring to a seed planted the previous night, suggesting that allowing her desires was a test of my love. She acknowledged my 15 years of devotion and emphasized that this was just one night for me. She admitted that it might weaken her resolve, but questioned what she would gain after 15 years of devotion if treated poorly. She expressed doubt about the effectiveness of the plan and suggested I give her time to cool down. She predicted that in about a week or two, I would likely be found drowning my sorrows at a bar, followed by her seeking forgiveness, which she referred to as Phase D. She questioned whether I truly regretted my actions and realized the depth of the hurt caused. She speculated that I wouldn't have pursued it if aware of the pain it would cause. She suggested I would profess love, beg, and cry, but expressed doubt about the effectiveness of this approach due to my public displays of affection with William. She concluded by stating that Phase D wouldn't work and hinted at the necessity of a backup plan. She referred to Phase D as threats, suggesting that she would take all the money, the house, and turn the children against me. She hinted at the possibility of losing my job and speculated about William providing top-notch lawyers for her. She described potential consequences of me ending up sad, broke, and alone, even suggesting the threat of moving in with him and living happily ever after with our kids. This last statement prompted a reaction from William, indicating his reluctance to such an idea. Lucy finally found her voice. "It's not such a big problem," she began. "Why don't we just relax and give ourselves time to think?" "This is Phase A, Lucy. We've been through this," I said firmly. "So, why don't we save everyone time and move on to the end result?" That's what I pondered last night, and my conclusion is that everyone, including the kids, would be better off if we divorced. It's much healthier than living in an unhappy home. In the end, it was clear that neither of us could find happiness in the midst of this turmoil. I asserted that despite any attempts to prevent me from seeing my children, I knew I was a good father, and ultimately, that's what mattered. I expressed doubts about receiving support from her family and friends once they learned of her actions. Money was never my priority. It had always been about her. There was a moment of stunned silence among everyone present as I questioned if anyone had more tricks up their sleeves or if I had missed anything. When there was no response, I addressed Jack, stating that he could keep his job, but I would see him in court for wrongful termination, as my job depended on having my wife as a client, which seemed to be the underlying reason for the situation. With that, I left, and the room fell silent. Shane followed me as usual. As we exited, Shane chuckled. "Well played. Looks like you took to heart the advice of keeping the plan to yourself." I couldn't help but smile. "Yeah, seems I botched that idea." Shane actually laughed as we left the building. "Good thing you stuck to civilian life. You'd never have cut it in the army anyway. Let's go." Shane grabbed his backpack and set off at a leisurely pace up the coast. After a mile, I struggled to keep up and began to wonder if it was a mistake. I heard him shout something from ahead about how physical exertion is a great way to distract from mental anguish. My burning muscles and lungs seemed to agree. The scenery was awe-inspiring, and Shane proved to be excellent company. He transitioned from inquiring about me to sharing amusing anecdotes from his days in the British Army. We spent hours exploring the island's northern region, tracing the coastline and ascending to a central peak. When Shane proposed jogging downhill for our return, I struggled to keep pace, suspecting he slowed down either to assist or tease me, depending on one's perspective. By noon, we were back, and while I was gasping for breath, Shane, a former physical education instructor, assured me of my decent fitness level. Feeling drained, I made my way to my room, finding Lucy absent, which led me to wonder if she was earning extra money. After a refreshing shower, hunger drove me to the dining room in search of sustenance, only to be disappointed yet again by the presence of William and Lucy. Shane lingered in the background, looking remarkably fresh and dapper in a suit. William, in his usual confident manner, began to address me. "Mark, my dear friend, I believe we started off on the wrong foot, and I want to extend my apologies. I've never encountered issues like this in my past relationships, and I certainly didn't intend to jeopardize your marriage. It's too late. I replied bluntly. You've completed the deed. I wish to retract my request to spend tonight with your wife and increase the compensation. With these words, William handed me a document. I opened it and found a check for $250,000. I glanced at Lucy, who seemed to be crying, and I couldn't resist commenting. You must have been quite skilled to earn that much, darling. Lucy's eyes sparked with anger. That's beside the point. We made a dreadful mistake, and we're trying to fix it. William acted like a gentleman and genuinely cared about your reaction. I chuckled at this notion. What's your notion of an ideal gentleman? Did he express gratitude after lovemaking? There's no need for jesting, Mark. This was simply a misjudgment on our part. We misjudged your response. It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience for both of us. You should appreciate Lucy's sacrifice to offer you and your children a better life. I questioned whether their actions were simply a misjudgment, expressing my clear opposition to their plan, which they disregarded. I pointed out that they could have stopped at any moment, but chose to continue until satisfying themselves. I tore up the check, sparing them from disgrace, but emphasized that the betrayal remained, doubting it could be repaired this time. Lucy began crying as I addressed them, questioning their motives, whether it was about control or the thrill of pursuing another man's wife, and criticizing their behavior as pathetic. I highlighted William's age and compared his actions to that of a child taking toys just because he could, suggesting that he should be engaging in more meaningful pursuits. In response, William laughed, stating his oversight of an international corporation and his charitable donations. He criticized my management of the corporation and questioned my involvement in charity work, implying that I was too self-absorbed and preoccupied with manipulating lives to genuinely help others. He suggested that I derived pleasure from humiliating others, as evidenced by the way I planned the weekend. I informed Lucy that William's interest in her wasn't solely exclusive, as he was involved with every board member's wife, so she was just one among many. I then addressed William directly, urging him to mature and seek genuine relationships, suggesting that he use his wealth for good and change his unpleasant demeanor. This seemed to cause him to falter in his speech and appear uncertain for the first time. I then instructed Shane to remove the objectionable matter from my sight before I took action. I noticed Shane conceal a slight smile before addressing Fellowes. I believe it's time for us to depart, sir, before your safety becomes a concern. After their departure, I grabbed a snack and headed to the beach, seeking to avoid the others. Just when I thought I was alone, I spotted Charlotte reclining in a hammock, engrossed in reading. If she was beautiful before, her smile now made her truly radiant. I approached her. Apologies for last night. Before I could say more, she responded,
No need for apologies. I was certain you'd accept the offer. If I had known, I wouldn't have approached you. Your reaction is completely understandable, and your speech at breakfast was exceptional.
I couldn't agree more. When you left, Lucy broke into tears, and I've never seen William appear so embarrassed. I relished every moment. Oh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that, considering your circumstances. I replied, Thank you. It's appreciated. I'm relieved things are becoming clearer. I'm tired of being told this is nonsense. You see, William is clueless about how to handle you. He's never faced rejection before and isn't accustomed to
Ethical dilemmas. Has he already offered you more money?
Yes, just before I came down. $250,000. What a fool. I advised him against it, but he's accustomed to paying his way until he gets what he desires. He'll face consequences for this, both professionally and personally. Charlotte was receptive and listened attentively as I discussed my marriage and children. Clearly intelligent and well-educated, she expressed surprise at Lucy's actions, given our seemingly content marriage, suggesting there might have been some discontent or an open arrangement between us. I pondered it. No, it's merely an unexpected betrayal. She seems entirely captivated by this man. He has a certain allure for women. It's charming, but the depth isn't substantial if you catch my drift. We conversed further, and I felt somewhat relieved. You truly care for her. Your response to the proposals and at breakfast must be devastating. I shrugged. I regret my involvement in this. It's not your fault. I just need to endure one more night, then perhaps I can escape. She smiled again, becoming a pleasant distraction. Well, perhaps I can assist with this. Dinner surprised everyone when I joined. Lucy wasn't seated next to William anymore. Dinner proceeded normally, though I brushed off Lucy's attempts at conversation. When Lucy suggested going to bed early, I politely declined, citing other plans. She looked embarrassed, which heightened when Charlotte hugged me as I rose from the table. We left together, walking down to the cabins on the beach. Initially, the plan was just to depart together and give Lucy a taste of her own medicine. But holding Charlotte felt right, really right. And when we kissed, some of the disappointment from the past 24 hours faded away. I wrestled with maintaining my morals, my sense of right and wrong. Then I glanced at her. I suppose Lucy wanted me to be more adaptable. And as far as I'm concerned, Lucy has already broken our marriage vows. I had an exceptional night with Charlotte. It wasn't merely her physical beauty, she exuded a serene allure. Every gesture seemed calculated and flawlessly executed. She truly mastered her allure. Surprisingly, thoughts of Lucy didn't cross my mind, nor did I feel guilty. The painful image of Lucy with William erased any hint of remorse. I enjoyed myself. After a boat taxi to the airport and the usual flight home, I collected the kids and arranged their weekend as best I could. I fabricated a vague story about a disagreement between their mother and me, but suggested we have dinner together. As Lucy entered the house, hauling our heavy suitcase, the children dashed upstairs shouting, "Hi, Mom!" Lucy smiled. "Dinner sounds good. Give me a few minutes to freshen up." "I'd prefer if you didn't, Lucy. Like you said, I'm uncertain how much time I'll have with them. So I'd rather we go alone, Lucy."
Upon meeting William, I felt an immediate connection. He exuded charm, confidence, and strength, reminiscent of old movie characters. It was odd that later, in Mark's presence, he seemed different. Flirting led to lunch, then dinner. It was exhilarating, dizzying even. After dinner, his goodnight kiss nearly melted me, but I was resolute not to cheat and informed him as such. William mentioned his past open relationships, making me wonder if Mark might be open to it. When he proposed the idea, I thought the money would justify it. Jack supported me, and we began planning for the weekend. The weekend started off wonderfully. I had a fantastic time with Mark and nearly abandoned the entire plan. If only I could. William assured me everything would be fine and advised Mark to relax. Both he and Jack anticipated Mark rejecting the idea, but suggested giving him time to calm down. Mark's reaction was completely unexpected and upended our plans. The most surprising thing was his apparent illness. Although I wanted to chase after him, William reassured me that everything would be okay. He arranged to meet Ed Charlotte, so when he didn't return, I assumed he stayed with her. I felt relieved. After waiting for months, I eagerly anticipated spending time with William. The moment he kissed me, I knew I would succeed. He led me to his bedroom, and even before I could undress, I was already filled with anticipation. William stood before me and undressed me delicately, treating me like a prized possession. I felt incredibly special. Despite his age, he was remarkably fit, and I wasn't disappointed by his physique or his masculinity. When I reached out to him, William pulled back and began kissing my entire body, exploring every inch. Gradually, he assessed my reactions and responded, seemingly understanding my desires perfectly. My first climax came quickly, thanks to his skillful touch. Upon regaining awareness, he rose and initiated a passionate kiss. His expertise in lovemaking left me in awe as waves of sensation enveloped my body. I was now completely consumed by desire as he intensified his rhythm. As the next climax approached, William kept pace with me. Eventually, we both found solace in each other's embrace. In the middle of the night, confusion engulfed me as I mistakenly believed I was with Mark, only to be startled by another man beside me. Feelings of guilt and concern for Mark's whereabouts flooded my mind. Evidently, I had disturbed William, prompting him to wake and reassure me with a kiss, alleviating my guilt. The following morning, as I attended to my morning routine, William approached me from behind, exuding insatiable desire. Returning to bed, we held hands before I took charge, straddling him, enraptured by the passion and ecstasy reflected in his expression. Once again, our passion culminated in a final climax, fulfilling my every expectation and leaving me elated. Thanking William for the wonderful night, it felt natural to intertwine our hands as we descended the stairs to the dining room, eagerly anticipating another night together. However, when I glanced at Mark, everything unraveled. Swallowing my panic, Mark's explosive outburst disrupted everything. It became evident that he hadn't slept with Charlotte. Despite my preparations for his departure, I was unprepared for his unexpected anger. His cold rage was unsettling as he systematically dismantled my arguments with logical precision. Despite William's support, Mark's swift rebuttal left me wavering. After his departure, I collapsed into tears, and for the first time, William appeared uncertain. Upon regaining consciousness, I attempted to locate him to no avail. Jack and William then suggested halting everything by offering more money. When we later presented Mark with this offer, I was astonished by the outcome. William's once commanding presence had dwindled so significantly that he appeared trivial. Previously, his authority was such that I unquestioningly accepted his every word, but now it was undermined to the extreme. Despite his assurance that we could enjoy ourselves without jeopardizing my marriage, this plan disintegrated, leaving me uncertain about everything. I then erupted into an irrational fury, assuming I would extend my stay on the island for enjoyment. However, Jack's calm yet cutting response caught me off guard. "Don't be foolish, Lucy. If you want any chance of saving your marriage, seek forgiveness. Your words must be genuine and sincere. He doesn't seem inclined to change his mind." Personally, I couldn't disagree with anything he said during breakfast. I was even more startled when Jack informed William that things would never be the same again. He went on to affirm Mark's decency and argue that he didn't deserve any of the trouble we caused. William, he suggested, should heed his advice and mature. I was astounded to find Mark at the evening dinner. Despite my attempts to engage him in conversation, he simply ignored me. His departure with Charlotte left me devastated. Although I considered chasing after him, what could I say? After all, I had essentially encouraged him to leave and spent much of the trip rationalizing casual encounters. I felt enraged and betrayed, especially upon recollecting my own past actions with Mark. The fact that our actions were premeditated and widely known only intensified my feelings of guilt. I couldn't help but think I deserved it, perhaps hoping that mutual indiscretions could salvage our relationship. The flight back, sans Mark, made me realize the dire state of my marriage, as he had found a way to leave the island ahead of us. I had never properly conversed with him. Following that incident, the gravity of my actions began to sink in, and waves of guilt overwhelmed me. I rationalized about the money. Who would turn down such an offer? My tears became uncontrollable sobs verging on hysteria. Jack and Margaret grew increasingly worried about my well-being. Upon returning home, Mark was present but declined to have dinner with me and the kids. I nearly held it together until they departed. Then I broke down in tears once more. Being excluded from the meal felt like an ominous foreshadowing of my future. When I regained composure, I struggled to anticipate what to say when Mark returned. The dilemma was that everything I thought of echoed what he had already expressed, and I felt embarrassed to seek advice from my mother or friends.
Upon arriving home, the kids retreated to their rooms, engrossed in their usual video games and phones. I observed Lucy in the kitchen, feeling a sense of unfamiliarity. She approached me, almost whispering, "Can we talk? I mean, really talk?" I shrugged, thinking that we should address this eventually, so why prolong it? "I'm sorry, Mark. I assure you it was just a one-time thing and I'll be yours again, faithful as before. The weekend. I did it for the money. It could change our lives as a family. I did it for us. You did it for yourself. We were fine. Money wasn't an issue. You couldn't wait to jump into his bed. You must have enjoyed the fancy dinner and closeness. Overall, everyone had a good time. You're overreacting. It shouldn't mean anything. You really should skip the excuses, Lucy. It's nonsense, and you know it. This wasn't casual. It was a premeditated betrayal. Arrogant, selfish, all those traits I detest, and now I loathe you. So you did the same to that woman." "No, I didn't. I sought revenge because nothing seemed to penetrate your indifference. You couldn't see how it affected me. I wouldn't have even considered it if I had a faithful wife. And I hope it stings, really stings, so you might understand my pain. Only I didn't scheme this in advance, making myself look like a fool to everyone else. Speaking of which, how long did your secret scheme take? And was this your first time with him?" Her eyes widened. Then she seemed to grasp that this was a genuine and reasonable inquiry. "It marked our inaugural dinner, and I sensed his interest in me. Jack and Margaret seemed to be probing, subtly asking if I was intrigued. The four of us dined together, and for the first time in my marriage, I felt a stir of attraction toward another man. His self-assurance was captivating. Knowing it was wrong, I resisted vehemently, avoiding an affair. Then William floated the idea of broaching the subject of opening up our relationship with you and gauging your thoughts on change. We briefly discussed it one evening, but it was evident you wouldn't consent. Then he proposed this plan, thinking the money would sway you. As the trip neared, nerves set in, and he suggested inviting Charlotte to ensure your agreement. Though I wasn't keen on the idea by then, I simply wanted it to unfold. I thought even if you didn't wholly endorse it, we could bounce back. But at breakfast, you shattered these notions, and I began to grasp the consequences of my actions. Was it worth it? Lucy sighed. No, definitely not. I got swept up in the moment and heeded his words. I never intended to hurt you. Oh, so unintentional pain. Straight to phase D. You seem to be enjoying this. Your energy during breakfast said it all. Now you're just telling me what I want to hear. Sorry, the honest answer is yes. I enjoyed it. He was good. It wasn't about being bigger or better, just different. It was exhilarating, a new thrill, and I was captivated by it. He's very experienced and skilled, but it was a one-time thing. Please don't abandon us and break up our family over a single mistake. I found myself smiling wryly. Funny, that's exactly how I'd describe what you've already done. Shattered our family over a one-time act. It's all on you. You're right. It's all my fault. I'm deeply sorry. I love you with all my heart. Well, not entirely. Part of it went to him. And even if you claim otherwise, your love wasn't enough to keep me faithful. How can I trust you again? I was so trusting because I never imagined you capable of this. I feel like I don't really know you. I can hardly bear to look at you, let alone pretend. This never happened. Lucy recoiled in shock. You can't claim to love me. I know. I never imagined losing you. I agree. You only considered yourself and your desires, neglecting me and the kids. But sometimes, love isn't enough. I stated that I tried to calm down and steer away from scoring points or escalating the argument. After a long pause, I continued, addressing Lucy. I mentioned that even if we decided to stay together and ignore the issue, things would never be the same. I emphasized that she had shattered the trust and sense of care we once had for each other, adding that she knew this more than anything. I reminded her that we cared about each other and the kids and didn't want anyone else to get hurt. I expressed my disbelief that she could hurt me like this. She expressed her love for me and admitted to making a colossal mistake, stating her willingness to do anything to rectify it. However, she disagreed with the idea of getting divorced just to appease me, mentioning that I broke her heart and threatened her, actions she believed were not indicative of true love. Lucy stared in silence, stunned, unsure of what else to say. We need to discuss the children. I believe kids are better off in separated families than in dysfunctional ones. So, from that perspective, divorce seems like the best option. I agree you should have custody, but don't try to prevent me from seeing them. It's for your benefit, too. They listen to me. You're not very good at setting boundaries. I furrowed my brow at the irony of her statement. And they're already testing you. It's better for you and for them if I remain in their lives. Lucy shrugged. Seriously, Lucy, regardless of what happens, don't keep the kids from me. Don't alienate me. I'm not a bad father. I treat them well and love them dearly. You haven't seen me angry yet. I'll fight you tooth and nail, spend all our money on lawyers, and we'll tear each other apart in the process. She nodded. I'd never do that. You're a wonderful father, and they need you. They'll want you to keep taking them on trips and coaching them in all their sports. I turned to her, surprised by the first comment where I felt she wasn't trying to manipulate me or justify her actions. Be careful, Lucy. You're seriously pushing phase D. Even though you know who I am, why do this? I can't help but think you secretly wanted us to split up. Lucy urgently expressed, God, never. There's no excuse for this. I became selfish, convinced I could gain something more. It felt like I could somehow hold on to you. Why didn't you stop me that night and just leave? Reflecting on the situation, I mentioned finding it hard to breathe and needing to leave. After that, nothing seemed to matter much anymore. The fact that she pursued another guy at any cost meant I had already lost her. I suggested that the conversation ended us long before she ended up in his bed. Perhaps it was all over when she first started planning everything. She spent weeks talking to him and getting ready. Letting her go and not trying to stop her made it easier to accept the end. I emphasized that there was no turning back. That was the beginning of the end. The marriage crumbled in less than 4 days. We divorced, thankfully, without needing counseling. I think Lucy didn't want to justify her actions. It's a shame in a way. I hoped a professional could help her see how wrong she was. She did keep one promise, though, and in the end, we split time with the kids about equally. She even confessed to them that everything was her fault, without getting into specifics. They were old enough to understand, and often chose for themselves where to stay. They were at that age when parents became famous, as taxi drivers and loan sharks. I might be biased, but I think they're great kids and handled the breakup remarkably well. Children can be surprisingly resilient. As per the divorce terms, Lucy could keep our house until the kids came of age, then sell or buy it. But I still wanted it for the children. It allowed them to stay in the same school. Luckily, it paid off. By the time the kids went to college, real estate prices had soared. Lucy had to buy out my share, and it turned out to be the best investment of my life. How could she afford it? Well, we split $250,000 in the divorce. Like with Charlotte, I couldn't claim the moral high ground. What can I say? I'm a practical person. Either way, it seemed like a small price compared to the cost of the marriage and our once happy life. I left my job, received a payout to avoid the embarrassment of a tribunal, and started my own web design business. Lucy kept trying to reconcile, but I wasn't interested. So, was ending the relationship the right choice? It was messy, and there were no winners, but the dire threats and consequences never materialized. I wasn't going to forget or forgive that night.